but we're always teaching that violence is never the answer.
Some of the kids who come here have shot somebody. What do they tell you?
Self-defense. They shot at me, so I shot back.
Some have described this as social media beefs turned violent. Can you expand upon that?
We live in this day now where someone can just look at someone's Instagram, slide in their DMs, and just begin with the hate.
I got shot by my best friend. It was over a girl.
For Ladonis Q. Araujo, the 25-year-old self-proclaimed Bloods gang member knows firsthand just how quickly the streets could turn on someone in Philadelphia.
The bullet's still there.
Mm-hmm.
Can you feel it? Can you?
Yeah, I can still feel it.
May I?
Yeah, sure. Press right here.
Oh, my gosh. Wow.
I done been in jail and I done been on a run. And I done been dead. There's 3 places I don't want to go no more.
I don't know whether to say you've been fortunate or you've been cursed.
Honestly, I wouldn't know what to call it. I would just call it life.
Q said the streets began to pull him in by age 12.
I shot my first gun at 11.
At a shooting range?
No. The moment you hit your peak at 12, that's when everything hit you. The world hit you. And you really got to realize either I'm going to be in it or I'm going to be on the side of it.
Now Q, also a member of Level Up, is focused on life on the other side of violence.
What changed?
Me. I didn't want to be dead. And I didn't want to put my mother through that pain.
Our mantra here is that healed people heal people. So as they're experiencing healing, they're going back into their communities as agents of healing.
But for Ajane, the road to healing is not easy. For months, she's been doing grueling physical therapy.
In talking to you, I certainly sense resilience, I sense kindness, I sense optimism, but I don't sense fear or anger.
I'm not really angry with anyone, not even the shooter, because like I said, I never had...
A stranger shot you for no reason, and you're not angry with that person?
I don't have no type of hate in my heart for anyone.
None?
None. Nah, don't hate anyone.
Coming up, tough questions for Philly's leaders.
Part of what I hear you say, I think, is there are problems in Philadelphia, but I ain't it.
No, I wouldn't say that.
We've fallen short, quite frankly.
And more mayhem and heartbreak.
We got multiple victims. We got hundreds of people.
You could meet somebody so full of life, and they could be gone just with a snap of a finger.
Saat bisnis makin spektakuler, dari mana-mana orderannya meluber, tapi ongkir bisa hemat bener. Pakai yang reguler, kirim kemana aja mulai 5.000 aja. Ini dia yang baru dari Grab Express.
With so much at stake in our world right now, we wanted to thank you for your trust and for making ABC News America's #1 news.
And thank you for making ABC News Live America's #1 streaming news.
It's an extraordinary story.
A computer salesman was supposed to report to prison to begin a 17-year sentence.
They let him turn himself into jail with no escort.
No one thought he would run.
How do you evade capture for 25 years? How do you do that?
Now, join the search, following the U.S. Marshals as they uncover new leads in a global manhunt. Can you help catch this fugitive?
Have you seen this man?
Have you seen this man?
Have you seen this man? Listen and join the all-new hunt wherever you get your podcasts.
Now streaming on ABC News Live 2020. True crime, cinematic, real-life drama, stunning, the unthinkable. Follow the clues. The Hunt. True crime 2020. Now streaming on ABC News Live.
National parks are incredibly safe places. A crime will happen.
Hey, Mama. My wife is fallen. She's in really critical condition.
At that time, I thought it was just a tragic accident.
There's still a lot of questions we need to ask.
There were small things that didn't totally add up.
This is 2 lives for Harold that have died now. I was shocked. Something's not right.
Admit it. These days, what you need to know
seems to change just about every day.
What is it that you really want to know, need to know?
To help you not just get through your day,
But to make the most of it. Feel smarter.
feel better.
Feel happier.
Well, how about a third hour of Good Morning America?
GMA 3, what you need to know. Now streaming on ABC News Live. It's all about you.
I know what happened, and I'm not guilty.
Why the fascination with criminal trials? Figure out what's really out there.
She revealed she had murdered his family.
I know in my heart that he did this.
It's the time of suspicion.
The ending's really tough.
You don't know whether truth is going to be difficult to find unless you try to find it.
America's #1 news, ABC News. Most watched, most trusted, and streaming live to you anytime, anywhere, and free. This is ABC News Live, America's #1 streaming news, free to you 24/7. Watch America's #1 news whenever you want it, wherever you are, anytime. ABC News Live, streaming live and free on all platforms.
Nightline continues. Here again, Byron Pitts.
Shot fired. I need a supervisor on scene. For the favor, I got a nailed shot.
Just days after we filmed in Philadelphia,
Somebody got shot.
there was a mass shooting at the city's iconic South Street, killing 3 and injuring 11.
Have multiple people shot.
19-year-old Kwani Thorpe, a member of Level Up, was there.
You just hear it. They just start shooting. I got pushed into like this bar. Like the security guy was like grabbing the kids, like they push them in, like get them in the bars for safety.
The next day, he learned his cousin Alexis, 27 years old, was one of the 3 people killed that night.
It still blows my mind. Like, how can you not be here? I even still call her phone, still text her, just to hear her voice message. Everybody say the world is a better place or the world should be a better place. Why not make it a better place? Why not stop the violence?
But for the city's top leaders,
Yesterday was a dark day for Philadelphia.
solutions are few and far between.
This act of violence is obviously no reflection on who we are as Philadelphians, what we stand for, or our resilience.
It may not be a reflection, but it is the reality. 4 suspects were arrested and charged in the mass shooting. Multiple guns were recovered, including a ghost gun.
So this room here is like our gun library where we archive our weapons.
Semi-automatic, automatic, legal, illegal, handguns, ghost guns, rifles, revolvers. Philadelphia Police Commissioner Danielle Outlaw has seen it all, talking to us in February.
This just speaks to the volumes of guns that we're seeing.
But what's in this room is nothing compared to what's available on the streets. Last year, the police confiscated almost 6,000 guns. This year, they've already confiscated more than 2,500.
It's pretty easy to get a gun here in the state.
How easy?
It's easier to get a gun than it is to get a driver's license. They end up in the hands of folks illegally, someone legally purchasing the firearm and then, passing it off. We've seen an increase in these ghost guns.
2 years ago, the Philadelphia police hired Outlaw as the force's first black female leader.
In 2021, 100% of the fatal victims aged 17 and under were black. What does that say to you?
We're losing our children. We're losing generations. A lot of the trauma that we're seeing is generational. Our victims, as you mentioned, are becoming younger and younger, but so are our shooters.
Outlaw's top law enforcement partner is District Attorney Larry Krasner.
Change makers take a lot of heat.
The former defense attorney is a self-described reform prosecutor. We spoke to him in February.
This is the kind of office where we do not think one size fits all.
Like many progressive prosecutors across the country, he's been both praised and a lightning rod for criticism. Krasner's critics point to rising crime rates and a low conviction rate for violent crimes while he's been in office.
So looking at homicides, record high in Philadelphia. The victims are becoming younger, the perpetrators are becoming younger. That's occurring on your watch.
Right. It is occurring on my watch. It is occurring across the United States.
How do you explain the surge in gun violence in Philadelphia, and how do you reduce it?
It has a ton to do with the incredible disruption of the pandemic. And you simultaneously have this massive gun buy related to pandemic fears, related to unrest. This is a witch's brew.
What do you think are the top reasons why?
Domestic violence as a driver, narcotic sales, and then we also know that social media beefs or arguments were three main drivers. We've fallen short, quite frankly, and there is an obligation to do better and to do more.
Recent data shows that arrests have only been made in 18% of non-fatal shootings. Outlaw is trying to change that. She's formed a special unit that will use forensics to focus on non-fatal shootings.
We're starting to look at non-fatal shootings as something as serious as a homicide. If we put the same level of priority on the non-fatal shootings, I am confident that we will reduce our homicides, because oftentimes the shooters for the non-fatal shootings are some of the same shooters for our homicides as well.
Commissioner Outlaw and D.A. Krasner have not always been aligned on their priorities.
Commissioner Outlaw has been critical of your office in the past, saying you're not prosecuting illegal gun cases aggressively enough.
I guess we have a fundamental difference of opinion. I think when you kill somebody with a gun, that is even more serious than when you carry a gun. What you'll find in almost every city where there are progressive prosecutors is that because there's a very, very low rate of police solving murders by gun and solving shootings, there's a real effort to talk about something else. And when those cases are not solved by police, there is nothing for me to prosecute.
Part of what I hear you say, I think, is there are problems in Philadelphia, but I ain't it.
No, I wouldn't say that. You know, I would not say that. I think that we have a sad history in Philadelphia of governmental dysfunction.
How should children in the streets of Philadelphia take that if two adults in leadership positions aren't aligned, don't agree?
We disagree on some areas, but we agree in many other areas. We both agree that gun violence has to stop. It crushes me that young people believe that they have to carry a gun to be safe.
What do you say to those teenagers who are walking to school afraid they're going to get shot, killed?
I understand your fear. I know that it is real. We need to support you in ways that we have not before, with real funding for education, for job programs, with real opportunities to fulfill your potential. It's our turn to step up.
While police and politicians grasp for solutions, back in West Philadelphia, children are still dying. Dreams are still delayed. Kids have to grow up sooner than they should and be their own rainbow in their own clouds.
What does a safe, gun-free Philadelphia look like to you?
If Philly was free and safe of guns, everybody would look at it the same way I look at it. Brighter, you know, a place of love as it should be. There's still some love here in Philly, but it's getting bad.
With so much at stake in our world right now, we wanted to thank you for your trust and for making ABC News America's #1 news.
And thank you for making ABC News Live America's #1 streaming news.
It was an extraordinary story.
A computer salesman was supposed to report to prison to begin a 17-year sentence.
They let him turn himself into jail with no escort.
No one thought he would run.
How do you evade capture for 25 years? How do you do that?
Now, join the search, following the U.S. Marshals as they uncover new leads in a global manhunt. Can you help catch this fugitive?
Have you seen this man?
Have you seen this man?
Have you seen this man? Listen and join the all-new hunt wherever you get your podcasts.
Now streaming on ABC News Live 2020. True crime, cinematic, real-life drama, stunning, the unthinkable. Follow the clues. The Hunt. True crime 2020. Now streaming on ABC News Live.
National parks are incredibly safe places. Crime will happen.
I'm a Mama, my wife had fallen. She's in really critical condition.
At that time, I thought it was just a tragic accident.
There's still a lot of questions we need to ask.
There were small things that didn't totally add up.
This is 2 lives for Harold that have died now. I was shocked. Something's not right.
Admit it. These days, what you need to know
seems to change just about every day.
What is it that you really want to know, need to know?
To help you not just get through your day,
But to make the most of it. Feel smarter.
feel better.
Feel happier.
Well, how about a third hour of Good Morning America?
GMA 3, what you need to know. Now streaming on ABC News Live. It's all about you.
I know what happened, and I'm not guilty.
Why the fascination with criminal trials? Figure out what's really out there.
She revealed she had murdered his family.
I know in my heart they did this.
It's the time of suspicion.
The ending's really tough. You don't know whether truth is going to be difficult to find unless you try to find it.
America's #1 news, ABC News. Most watched, most trusted, and streaming live to you anytime, anywhere, and free. This is ABC News Live, America's #1 streaming news, free to you 24/7. Watch America's #1 news whenever you want it, wherever you are, anytime. ABC News Live, streaming live and free on all platforms.
The secrets of pizza perfection, 12,000 pies in the making.
We're going to need 12,000 pizzas, but believe me, there was a lot of pizza eaten during that time.
Chef Francisco Migoya teaming up with ex-Microsoft tech executive Nathan Myhrvold to create a 1,700-page guide to one of the world's most popular foods.
We are unapologetic about loving pizza, and part of that says, hey, you can make a very traditional one, but if you want to step out a little bit on the wild side and try some stuff that might seem crazy, you might find you like it.
Their ambitious project, dubbed Modernist Pizza, played out in this high-tech kitchen laboratory outside Seattle, where chefs and scientists tested pizza techniques in 500 experiments over 3 years.
This 3D scanner, essentially what it does is it allows us to measure volume very accurately. What we learned from this is really, truly how ingredients interact with each other, how they affect each other.
This gives you a more precise reading than your tongue.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely.
From the texture of the dough to the tanginess of the tomato sauce.
So these are your grocery store tomatoes
The hardest we could find. The hardest.
Okay, those are usually pretty tasteless.
Yes. So.
Okay. Wow.
It's just,
That's unbelievable.
It's like the ripest summer
Salty,
tomato.
tangy.
Super flavorful.
I'm going to take this home
Yeah.
and keep eating
I mean, it's like you could eat it just like that. It really is that good.
The team even finding new uses for day-old leftover slices.
We took a pizza and we freeze-dried an entire pizza that we baked. So there's absolutely no moisture in this pizza. You could eat it if you wanted to. It would be like a cracker.
A problem with some dishes that are viewed as traditional is they stop evolving and they stop improving. And I think that's a terrible mistake. People said, you know, I could improve it. I could improve it here. I could improve it there. And that continuous improvement is what brings you things that are just fantastically delicious.
At 35 pounds and 1,000 recipes, Myhrvold and Migoya's passion project has been dubbed the Pizza Bible.
Pretty much, I think everything you need to know about pizza is in here. At least it should be.
What I'm taking away is that you're really actually trying to empower people to make their best pizza.
The most important thing that the objective of this book is for people who love pizza to have a deeper understanding of it, to learn ways of making it better, to basically, I guess you could say, perfecting it.
We got a taste for ourselves from the chewy traditional Neapolitan.
This is the original pizza. This is where all other pizzas come from.
To modernist pies on the cutting edge.
So you can hear how crispy the crust is.
This pizza, a take on ham and pea soup with an experimental delicacy extracted from ordinary frozen green peas.
And that's what we call pea butter.
Pea butter.
Yeah, but there's no fat in peas.
The truly perfect pizza, Magoya says, may be all in the eye of the beholder.
Truffles are more than flavor, it's aroma.
But after trying slices at 250 pizzerias worldwide, he has a handle on the good.
What makes Detroit Pizza Detroit is first the pan that it's baked in, which is this. These were pans that were used in the automotive industry.
And the not so good.
I will say that the worst pizza I had was a pizza that had bananas on top. It's bananas, pizza cheese, and tomato sauce. And it's
awful.
as bad as you think it is, maybe worse.
How do you think the pandemic's changed pizza making?
When people started staying at home, they wanted to do all these projects, whether it was sourdough or knitting or what have you. Pizza was part of that as well. But it's also changed in the way that, restaurants had to pivot. Restaurants that may not have been serving pizza. Pizza is a great food for making ahead of time, putting in a box, and, sending away.
The data shows Americans devoured pizza during COVID. I mean, what does that tell you?
I mean, it's a food that is very close to our heart. And not just Americans, but the world over. There's only, I think, 2 countries where you can't find pizza. Pizza has found a home in almost every country on the planet, so there's a reason for that.
So whether it's take home or try it yourself, pizza perfection now perhaps more achievable than ever.
ABC News, America's #1. With so much at stake, so much on the line, more Americans turn here than any place else. ABC News World News Tonight with David Muir, America's #1 most watched newscast, now streaming on ABC News Live.
Elizabeth Holmes found guilty on 4 counts of fraud, facing the possibility of decades in prison. Now, we take you inside the courtroom and behind the scenes. The Dropout, Elizabeth Holmes on Trial. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
National parks are incredibly safe places. Crime will happen.
Hey, my wife has fallen. She's in really critical condition.
At that time, I thought it was just a tragic accident.
There's still a lot of questions we need to ask.
There were small things that didn't totally add up.
This is 2 lives for Harold that have died now. I was shocked. Something's not right.
Admit it. These days, what you need to know
seems to change just about every day.
What is it that you really want to know, need to know?
To help you not just get through your day,
but to make the most of it. Feel smarter.
Feel better.
Feel happier.
Well, how about a 3rd hour of Good Morning America?
GMA 3, what you need to know. Now streaming on ABC News Live. It's all about you.
America's #1 news, ABC News. Most watched, most trusted, and streaming live to you anytime, anywhere, and free. This is ABC News Live, America's #1 streaming news, free to you 24/7. Watch America's #1 news whenever you want it, wherever you are, anytime. ABC News Live, streaming live and free on all platforms.
Bombshells and ballots. On a day the January 6th committee launched a surprise hearing with shocking testimony. 8 states went to the polls to cast their votes for primary elections.
The president said something to the effect of, "I'm the effing president. Take me up to the Capitol now." The president reached up towards the front of the vehicle to grab at the steering wheel. Mr. Engel grabbed his arm, said, "Sir, you need to take your hand off the steering wheel. We're going back to the West Wing. We're not going to the Capitol."
Just a few hours ago, a former White House aide and witness to the insurrection testified before the American people, claiming that former President Donald Trump was told some of his supporters had weapons on January 6th, but that he said he didn't care and that they weren't there to hurt him, adding that the former president and former chief of staff Mark Meadows were aware of the potential chaos and violence the day the election was certified. How will these allegations play out at the polls with Trump-endorsed candidates seeking nominations? This as the country grapples with a Supreme Court decision bringing sweeping changes to women's health care in this country. In the wake of the reversal of Roe versus Wade, at least 13 states have ceased nearly all abortion services. States are facing legal challenges over these trigger laws banning or restricting the procedure. People in 3 of those states voting today.
Our first patient was from Arkansas. Our second patient was from Oklahoma.
And tonight, ABC News Live is bringing you results of some of the most consequential races of the primary election season, from the battle between billionaires for Illinois governor to New York, where for the first time in more than a decade, the ballot does not include the name Cuomo. Complete coverage and analysis starts right now. Good evening, everyone. I'm Lindsay Davis. Thank you so much for streaming with us. Another primary election day is upon us, but this one carries a new weight. Women's health care becoming a battleground in states across the country, and a surprise January 6th hearing with shocking testimony about former President Trump's escalating aggression the night of the insurrection. Today, votes were cast in New York, Oklahoma, Colorado, Illinois, Utah, in Mississippi and South Carolina. There were runoff elections and one special election in Nebraska. As voters went to the polls, testimony unfolded in front of the American people from Cassidy Hutchinson, a former top aide to then White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows. Under oath, Hutchinson said former President Trump knew some of the rally-goers were armed, but that he was not concerned about the risk in going to the Capitol because they were on his side. Meanwhile, in the wake of the Supreme Court decision overturning Roe v. Wade, the battle over abortion rights now turns to the states, and at least 13 have stopped nearly all abortion services to date. About a dozen more are set to take action in the coming weeks and months. 3 states with trigger laws held primary elections today. Let's bring in ABC News political director Rick Klein for what to watch tonight. Rick, today's voting, of course, as we were just talking about, comes in the wake of the Supreme Court's monumental decision overturning Roe v. Wade. How is that issue of abortion playing out in today's contests?
Lindsay, we've already seen the Republican incumbents in Oklahoma, which is a state that does not have abortion rights currently, win in that state. We saw the governor and the incumbent senator there, James Lankford. Both of them consider themselves so-called pro-life. They ran on that issue in the closing days of the campaign, given the Roe v. Wade decision. Kind of an opposite story going on, though, in some states that now have Democratic governors. We're looking at Colorado, Illinois, and New York. All of them are states that now have protections for abortion rights, and with Democratic governors in place, they'd be well-positioned to keep them. But they've got aggressive challengers from Republicans in each of those states that would look to limit abortion rights. What kind of matchups we get could make a big difference about how those races play out, particularly in a big year for Republicans. You're talking about a battleground like Colorado. Illinois and New York, they are bluer states at the national level, but there's always a possibility that you have a Republican governor in there, and we've seen a rejuvenated attention to those races in the wake of Friday's ruling.
And of course, we talked about earlier tonight that in some of these races, Democrats are really trying this unique strategy of trying to influence who wins in the Republican primaries. Explain what's going on there.
Yeah, and I want to zoom in on Illinois in particular on that, because that's where you have the governor, J.D. Pritzker. He just won tonight. ABC News can project a nomination for a second term in office. He is quite rich. He's a billionaire and heir to a major fortune, and he is using some of that wealth to funnel money to try to choose his own opponent. He used some of that money to try to help the candidacy of State Senator Darren Bailey, who has the Trump endorsement in that race. The way he did it is attacking him as too conservative for Illinois. As you can see, Illinois is kind of a battleground in the sense of there's some redder parts of the state and some bluer parts in the Chicago area. But when you call someone too conservative for the state, you're basically helping them in the Republican primary. It's also happening in Colorado. So far, it would look like the Democrats are getting what they want. The returns are still flowing in out of Illinois. The polls closed roughly an hour ago. And right now, Darren Bailey is up against Richard Irvin, who is more the choice of the Democratic establishment. But of course, it's a risky strategy when you choose your own opponent, because you could end up with a governor who believes that there should be severe restrictions in abortion rights and also is a denier of the legitimacy of the last election.
And some incumbents are also in danger of losing their seats tonight, in part because of redistricting. What are some of the races that you're watching on that front?
Yeah, back to Illinois for that one, because we know for a fact that there are going to be 2 incumbents who lose tonight. One of them is going to be in this newly created 15th district, a conservative district, definitely a red-leaning district. There you have the Trump-endorsed Mary Miller against Rodney Davis, both of them incumbent congressmen forced to run against each other. Congresswoman Miller was just endorsed by Trump over the weekend. She's got a lead in the early returns that are flowing in tonight. She said at that rally with President Trump by her side the other day, thanking him for his victory for what she called, quote, white life. She said she misspoke, but Rodney Davis, has used that as an attack against her. And up here, just in the Chicago suburbs, you have a bluer Democratic district where you have two members of Congress facing each other again because of redistricting. Congresswomen Maureen Newman and Sean Casten, both incumbents. Sean Casten leading in the early returns. Interesting here, Lindsay, Maureen Newman won her race 2 years ago by campaigning against a fellow Democrat who opposed abortion rights. There aren't many of them, the so-called pro-life Democrats. One of them was Dan Lipinski, lost the race to Maureen Newman. We'll see tonight whether she's able to hold on in the wake of this ruling, in the wake of a lot of attention on Illinois as the Democrats try to hold control of the House.
All right, we will be keeping that watchful eye along with you, Rick Klein. Our thanks to you. Results are already rolling in for Oklahoma, where ABC projects Governor Kevin Stitt wins the Republican governor primary. As Roe v. Wade was overturned last week, Stitt posted a video to Twitter celebrating that decision. And also, ABC projects that Superintendent of Public Education Joy Hoffmeister will face off against Governor Stitt in November. And in the Oklahoma Republican Senate primary for the full term, ABC projects James Lankford will win. Lankford is seeking re-election. When Roe v. Wade was overturned, Lankford tweeted, "Today is a great day for our nation as Roe v. Wade has been overturned." In the aftermath of January 6th, Lankford broke with the group of Senate Republicans and voted to certify the 2020 election results. Turning now to New York. In the race for governor, there are 4 candidates seeking the GOP nomination. U.S. Representative Lee Zeldin, Rob Astorino, Harry Wilson, and Andrew Giuliani, the son of Rudy Giuliani, former New York mayor and attorney to former President Trump. On the Democratic side, it's a 3-way race between a favored incumbent who has yet to serve a full term as governor and 2 challengers. Governor Kathy Hochul is considered a front-runner as she campaigns for her first full term as governor since she stepped into the position in August of 2021 after Andrew Cuomo's resignation, becoming the state's first woman governor in her state's history. Her 2 primary opponents are U.S. Representative Tom Suozzi and New York City Public Advocate Jumaane Williams. And now let's go to Trevor Ault here in New York, where he's tracking the race for the governor's mansion. Trevor, so break down some of the dynamics that we're seeing on both sides of the aisle in this race for the New York governor.
Sure, Lindsay. So on the Democratic side tonight is largely about the current governor, Kathy Hochul, and it feels here at this watch party a lot like a victory party that's waiting to happen. They know that her campaign said just a few days ago that they felt this was an imminent primary victory. Behind me, I'm sure you can hear him. That is Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, who is speaking right now as we speak. Number one, touting these candidates, but also talking about the fight that is ahead for Democrats, given all of the news of the past week. Kathy Hochul appears to be a significant favorite in this race. She's got a few challengers, but you mentioned she's the first woman governor of New York. She has a chance to become the first elected woman governor of New York. When former Governor Andrew Cuomo was in the midst of all those scandals and they were breaking, there was some discussion that perhaps New York, for once, might be vulnerable to a Republican governor. That talk has seemed to fade away a little bit, at least so far. We've got a long way till November, but tonight, on the Democratic side, seems to be about Kathy Hochul. The Republican side, much more of a dice roll. There's been very little polling. It would seem like the front runner would probably be Congressman Lee Zeldin of Long Island. He's got the backing of the Republican Party here in New York. He has the most individual campaign donations as well. But Andrew Giuliani, who you mentioned, is a real wild card in this race. He has been repeatedly banging the MAGA drum, essentially just touting his ties to the former president. He has not received an endorsement from the former president. But as we are seeing in all of these Republican primaries across so many states, it is yet another battle to see how far the MAGA messaging can carry a Republican candidate versus often, once again, the Republican establishment, which has backed a more moderate candidate, Lindsay.
And how are the recent landmark Supreme Court decisions in gun and abortion impacting the contests in New York?
Well, it's certainly top of mind, Lindsay. I mean, I just heard from Senator Schumer talking about, he's like, listen, we're here to celebrate, but I make no mistake, we're in a battle for the soul of this nation, particularly with abortion. We know, obviously, New York tends to lean very much in favor of abortion rights. So for the Democrats, there is a lot of discussion about how they're going to continue to fight to establish and make sure that that right is available here and it's available to other people who might be losing that right around the rest of the country. Republicans are largely staying away from that issue as they're campaigning here in New York because it would be fairly unpopular to campaign against abortion rights. What is more of an interesting argument and more interesting in terms of campaign strategy in New York is gun rights right now, because we know that Supreme Court decision was based on the concealed carry law here in New York State. They repealed a century-old law here. You're now hearing from Governor Hochul and from the other Democratic candidates talking about how they're going to try to work with this new reality, try to figure out the places that they can ban weapons. They're talking about churches. They're talking about the subway. On the Republican side, on top of championing this Supreme Court decision, they're also talking a lot about crime, as it's been happening in New York, as in a lot of the country. Crime rates have been rising lately. There is some fear in the public, and Republicans are trying to seize on that opportunity right now, Lindsay.
Yeah, it seems like Eric Adams was touting Hochul earlier as a partner with trying to get the guns off the street and keep New Yorkers safe as well. So we'll see how his endorsement plays out as well. Trevor Ault, we thank you so much. I know it's a loud environment in there, and you've been hanging in there throughout. So we appreciate you tonight. Projecting, exactly. Now to Colorado, where false claims about the 2020 election are a centerpiece of the Secretary of State race. The Republican primary features a prominent election denier, Tina Peters. 3 Republicans are fighting to unseat the Democratic incumbent, Jenna Griswold. So let's go to ABC's Zareen Shah, who joins us tonight from the Denver election division, where ballot counting is now underway. Zareen, give us a sense of what's happening there tonight.
Hi, Lindsay. This process doesn't just start in this room right behind me. It starts in the room right beyond that. That is where those ballots first come in, and those signatures are examined very, very closely. They're compared to the signatures that already exist on file, and if those signatures don't match up, there's a bipartisan team of workers that will take an even closer look. It eventually moves on to this room right here, where you have workers working together in teams. They remove those ballots from the envelopes right there, and eventually all of that moves on to a tallying room. We'll see us there in the next hour. Transparency is really key here. In fact, in that room where we will be, there are cameras all around us. They live stream 24/7. There are bipartisan workers there as well, and large windows where any member of the public can see exactly what's going on. Now, I will say the load here this time is really light. There's only about an 18% turnout in this area, which is really low for Denver.
Wow, only 18%. So give us an idea where Colorado stands on abortion and how some voters there are reacting to the Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe v. Wade.
Of course, that's a really hot topic here. Colorado is bracing for even more abortion patients to come into this state, and it's because they're surrounded by states like Utah, Oklahoma, Texas is close by as well, Wyoming. Now, the state law here is very liberal when it comes to abortion, but of course, there are a lot of people here who are worried about it still. We spoke to voters today, and even though in this state, a woman can get an abortion at any point in the process, there is no waiting time. They're very concerned here, the people we spoke to, about Roe being overturned.
All right, Zareen Shah in Colorado for us. Thanks so much, Zareen. It remains unclear just what the impact of the January 6th testimony will have on what voters do for the midterms. But today's House Select Committee hearing was nothing short of explosive. Today, a former White House aide gave an unvarnished and shocking account of what was said and done on that infamous day by the former president. ABC's chief Washington correspondent Jonathan Karl has more.
Her name is Cassidy Hutchinson. She just turned 26, and today she told the American people what she witnessed from her vantage point just steps away from the Oval Office as the top aide to Chief of Staff Mark Meadows. She testified that on January 2nd, as she escorted Rudy Giuliani from a White House meeting, he told her Donald Trump was planning to go to the Capitol himself on January 6th.
He looked at me and said something to the effect of, "Cass, are you excited for the 6th? It's going to be a great day." I remember looking at him and saying, "Rudy, could you explain what's happening on the 6th? He had responded something to the effect of, "We're going to the Capitol. It's going to be great. The president's going to be there. He's going to look powerful. He's going to be with the members. He's going to be with the senators. Talk to the chief about it. Talk to the chief about it. He knows about it."
And did you go back then up to the West Wing and tell Mr. Meadows about your conversation with Mr. Giuliani?
I did. He didn't look up from his phone and said something to the effect of, There's a lot going on, Cass, but I don't know. Things might get real bad on January 6th. That evening was the first moment that I remember feeling scared.
Then, the morning of January 6th, Hutchinson testified Meadows was told there were weapons in the crowd.
Where I remember Tony mentioning knives, guns in the form of pistols and rifles, bear spray, body armor, spears, and flagpoles. Spears were one item, flagpoles were one item, and then Tony had relayed to me something to the effect of, and these effing people are fastening spears onto the ends of flagpoles.
The committee played police radio traffic from that morning, backing up the reports of armed protesters.
I got 3 men walking down the street in fatigue while carrying AR-15.
As Trump got to the Ellipse for his rally outside the White House, he was angry that more of the crowd wasn't allowed inside the secure area around the stage. Some apparently stayed outside the security perimeter because they didn't want to give up their weapons.
He wanted it full, and he was angry that we weren't letting people through the mags with weapons. I overheard the president say something to the effect of, I don't effing care that they have weapons. They're not here to hurt me. Take the effing mags away. Let my people in. They can march to the Capitol from here. Let the people in. Take the effing mags away.
Hutchinson testified that White House counsel Pat Cipollone was adamant that Trump not go to the Capitol.
Mr. Cipollone said something to the effect of, please make sure we don't go up to the Capitol, Cassidy. Keep in touch with me. We're going to get charged with every crime imaginable if we make that movement happen.
Thank you very much.
But Hutchinson said Trump was not willing to take no for an answer. And after his speech was over, he ordered the presidential vehicle to take him to Capitol Hill. But lead Secret Service agent Robert Engel refused. Hutchinson testified she saw him and Deputy Chief of Staff Tony Ornato just after they returned to the White House with an angry President Trump.
I noticed Bobby Engel, who is the head of Mr. Trump's security detail, sitting in a chair, just looking somewhat discombobulated and a little lost.
Hutchinson said that she was told that when the president got into the car, he believed he was heading to the Capitol.
So once the president had gotten into the vehicle with Bobby, he thought that they were going up to the Capitol. And when Bobby had relayed to him, we're not, we don't have the assets to do it. It's not secure. We're going back to the West Wing. The president had very strong, very angry response to that. Tony described him as being irate. The president said something to the effect of, I'm the effing president, take me up to the Capitol now. To which Bobby responded, sir, we have to go back to the West Wing. The president reached up towards the front of the vehicle to grab at the steering wheel. Mr. Engel grabbed his arm, said, sir, you need to take your hand off the steering wheel. We're going back to the West Wing. We're not going to the Capitol. Mr. Trump then used his free hand to lunge towards Bobby Engel. And when Mr. Ornato had recounted this story to me, he had motioned towards his clavicles.
It wasn't the first time Trump had exploded in rage. Hutchinson described seeing what happened a month earlier after Attorney General Bill Barr declared that there was no significant fraud in the election.
Ms. Hutchinson, how did the president react to hearing that news?
I first noticed there was ketchup dripping down the wall, and there's a shattered porcelain plate on the floor. The valet had articulated that the president was extremely angry at the Attorney General's AP interview and had thrown his lunch against the wall.
And Ms. Hutchinson, was this the only instance that you are aware of where the president threw dishes?
It's not. There were several times throughout my tenure with the Chief of Staff that I was aware of him either throwing dishes or flipping the tablecloth to let all the contents of the table go onto the floor and likely break or go everywhere.
And on January 6th, even after he returned to the White House, Trump still wanted to join the march to the Capitol.
He said he wanted to physically walk with the marchers. He wanted to be a part of the march in some fashion.
But he did not go, and his supporters soon breached the Capitol building. Hutchinson said Chief of Staff Meadows initially did nothing.
I said, watching the TV, Chief? He was like, yeah. The rioters are getting really close. Have you talked to the president? He said, No, he wants to be alone right now.
Then the White House counsel came rushing in.
And I remember Pat saying to him something to the effect of, the rioters have gotten to the Capitol, Mark. We need to go down and see the president now. And Mark looked up at him and said, he doesn't want to do anything, Pat.
Trump was even unmoved by his supporters chanting, "Hang Mike Pence."
I remember Pat saying something to the effect of, Mark, we need to do something more. They're literally calling for the vice president to be effing hung. And Mark had responded something to the effect of, you heard him, Pat. He thinks Mike deserves it. He doesn't think they're doing anything wrong. To which Pat said something, this is effing crazy.
The committee pointed out it's almost exactly what Trump told me 6 weeks after he left the White House.
Because it's common sense, John. It's common sense that you're supposed to protect. How can you, if you know a vote is fraudulent, right? Yeah. How can you pass on a fraudulent vote to Congress?
At the end of the hearing today, Cassidy Hutchinson was asked about her own boss, Mark Meadows, and about Rudy Giuliani, who had told her January 6th would be a great day. She said both wanted presidential pardons.
Ms. Hutchinson, did White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows ever indicate that he was interested in receiving a presidential pardon related to January 6th?
Mr. Meadows did seek that pardon. Yes, ma'am.
Our thanks to Jonathan Karl. Republican Utah Representative John Curtis joins us now. Congressman, thanks so much for talking with us tonight. Let's start with today's bombshell of a hearing. You were one of the 35 House Republicans who voted in favor of a bipartisan January 6th commission last year. What was your reaction to what we heard today?
Well, I did listen, and I listened very carefully, and I found myself wishing we would have had that original bipartisan commission, because I think it would have added a lot of credibility. I think a lot of people would have liked to see questions asked like way of a cross-examination. Not that the witness wasn't extremely credible. I just think that would have been helpful.
So you don't consider it to be bipartisan, even though you have two Republicans on the committee?
Well, you know, I think everybody would like to see at least some pushback, some questions asked. Here again, it was an extremely credible witness, but you always want to hear from the other side, right?
What would you have liked to have asked?
Well, I would have not necessarily asked this witness the question, but I would have asked a long time ago, who's in charge of House security? Why weren't we better prepared? Who made those decisions? Who made the decision not to call the National Guard? All questions that we've not had a chance to have an answer to. I'd love to see Nancy Pelosi before the committee.
How have the January 6th hearings played in your community?
Well, I think many people, if you ask them, they care right now. I mean, at the time, they were very interested. At the time right now, they care about gas prices. They care about inflation. They care about the war. And I don't think a lot of them are watching, quite frankly.
I want to turn now to the issue of abortion and the Supreme Court ruling on Roe v. Wade. Today, Utah state courts cleared the way for a law banning abortions after 18 weeks, but put the trigger law, which would ban all procedures, on hold. If abortions do get banned in your state, are there additional resources that you're advocating for that could potentially help young families in need?
Well, listen, I've said ever since this appeared that it was going to be overturned, that we must start answering some questions about assistance that we're giving women with unwanted pregnancies or unexpected pregnancies. I think it's time that we ask some questions about accountability for fathers. And I think those are all very, very important questions as we turn this corner in the United States.
These, of course, are major issues for all Americans, but how do they weigh against everyday pocketbook issues? I know that you mentioned gas prices, and that's something that your constituents are certainly worried about. I would imagine inflation as well. But for voters in your district, how does this all play out, and what's the weight or value put on it?
So we're a very, very conservative state. I can't say everybody here is pro-life. Many are. Of course, we've had a trigger law in place. And so I think a lot of people are pleased with the decision. They're ready for the trigger law. And then beyond that, they go back to gas prices and inflation and the economy.
And Congressman, before I let you go, just one more. I just wanted to kind of circle back on the hearing today, because I know you gave your reaction, but I am curious if anything that you heard surprised you or anything that kind of jarred you.
Well, I must say the testimony about what happened in the car with the president is a perfect example of wait a minute, I want to know more, right? Like it almost seemed like we went over that very quickly. I would love to know more about that. And I'd love to have more people. And here again, that's where we lose the advantage of additional people that we could call as witnesses, or who the Republicans might call as a witness. But I think that was very sobering what we heard about what happened in the president's automobile.
It sounds like we may hear more as potentially the Secret Service will give testimony. So, okay, Utah Congressman John Curtis, we thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate you coming on the show.
Absolutely.
To Illinois now, where the governor's race is shaping up to become a battle of the billionaires. On the GOP side, ABC projects Republican State Senator Darren Bailey will win the nomination. Bailey received an endorsement from Trump this past Saturday during the former president's rally in Illinois. You see Darren Bailey there with nearly half of the vote, with just a quarter of the expected vote reporting, but already projected to be the winner. Current Democratic Governor J.B. Pritzker, the heir of the Hyatt Hotel enterprise, is running for re-election up against Beverly Miles, a former nurse, hoping to become the first black governor of Illinois. You see J.B. Pritzker easily defeating Beverly Miles. Joining us from Pritzker's campaign party in Chicago is Eric Hong from our partner station, WLS. Eric, good to have you on tonight. Thanks for joining us. Governor Pritzker is favored to beat Mills. Seems like he's already done that pretty handily. What's his support like in the state?
Yeah, certainly his attention now, Lindsay, goes to the general election. And really it depends on where in the state of Illinois you are. In the city of Chicago, Governor Pritzker, still relatively popular, has relatively strong support with the progressive voting base in the city. But then you start to head out into the suburbs of Chicago, the collar counties of Chicago is what we call it. And he starts to hit some political headwinds. And then if you start talking about downstate Illinois, south of Chicago, there are pockets of Illinois where he is highly unpopular. A lot of this is rooted in his decisions during the pandemic. The lockdowns, the mask mandates were very unpopular in some moderate to conservative communities. And so the farther outside of Chicago the governor gets, the less popular he is, which in part is why he really made a political calculation several months ago to pour millions of dollars, he and the Democratic Governors Association pouring millions of dollars in campaign ads to try to prop up Darren Bailey, as you mentioned, now projected to win on the GOP side. So if you're the governor, you feel like that was probably money well spent. He's making a calculation that Bailey, State Senator Bailey, is not going to be as popular in what he views as the battleground of Illinois, which is the suburban Chicago voters. He feels that Bailey, who is from downstate, he's a farmer, that he's not going to do as well in the Chicago suburbs as, say, a more moderate candidate like Aurora Mayor Richard Irvin, who early on was seen as the front runner. Bailey went from underdog in a very short amount of time to now being the victor on the GOP side of the coin. Lindsay.
In response to the reversal of Roe v. Wade, Pritzker called a special session hoping to make Illinois one of the strongest states for reproductive rights. Where do voters traditionally stand on this issue there?
Yeah, and again, it depends, Lindsay, on where you are in the state of Illinois. Strong support for a women's right to choose in the city of Chicago. But again, the farther outside of Chicago and in some of the collar counties and also downstate, you have more conservative voices weighing in on that issue. But as you mentioned, the governor calling a special session. He hopes to convene the legislature in the coming weeks to strengthen what are already, as you mentioned, very strong abortion rights laws here in the state of Illinois. It's my understanding that abortion is legal in the state of Illinois up until viability of the fetus, and that viability is determined by the medical practitioner, as opposed to some other states where there's actually a numerical timeline in the number of weeks assigned to the law. This is up to the discretion of the woman's doctor, and then past viability, if the woman's health, the woman's life is at risk, the mother's life is at risk, abortion is still legal in the state of Illinois. So still, very much a left of center for many of the states in the country, but Governor Pritzker and the legislature seeking to even strengthen what is currently on the books.
Eric Hong, thank you so much for joining us. Good to have you on the show. And now I want to take a look at an update here. We have projected here at ABC News that New York's governor on the Democratic side, 21% of expected vote reporting. We have Kathy Hochul there. New York Democratic governor primary. She is now projected to win, according to ABC News, pretty handily there with 66% of the vote, only 21% again of the vote currently reporting. And we are joined now by Democratic Congresswoman Cheri Bustos of Illinois. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, Congresswoman. You're one of several veteran House Democrats not running for re-election in this year's midterms. Just how challenging do you think that it's going to be for Democrats to hold on to the House given the thinning ranks that you're facing?
Well, I think the questions that we all have to take a look at right now are what will the long-term, meaning the next 4 months, impact of the Roe versus Wade decision be? What will the long-term results of this January 6th commission, what will that be? Today was a bombshell of a day as far as the testimony from the White House aide. And what's going to happen to gas prices and the price of a pound of bacon? So I mean, I think those are the unknowns at this point, 4 months out. But I think they will all play into this one way or another. It's just a matter of seeing exactly how much one will outweigh the other.
I mean, if I were to ask you to get out your crystal ball here, obviously you just kind of stated what's at play, but so much attention in particular right now on the Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe v. Wade. How much do you think that will motivate Democratic voters this fall?
Well, look, I think people right now, as we're having this conversation, are motivated. This is something where, especially if you are a woman and who values making her own medical decisions, her own healthcare decisions, this was horrible news that led to the members of the Democratic caucus to immediately leave the House floor and march over to the Supreme Court in an impromptu march last week. I had just had hip replacement surgery 2 weeks before, so I hobbled over with my cane, but I still hobbled over with my cane to get there. So it's very emotional. Now, here's the thing. So how high will those emotions run when you perhaps go fill up your car on the way over to the voting booth and see the sticker shock of filling up your vehicle? So I think those are the unknowns right now. There are some folks who are saying we could go into a recession. There are in the congressional district that I represent in central and northwestern Illinois, a family of four makes the median income is $50,000. So it hurts to go to the grocery store right now. It hurts to fill up your Ford F-150 right now. And so all of that is at play. All of that will be on the ballot. I just think right now, as we're having this conversation, we don't know exactly where things will land and if emotions will stay high.
The Biden administration, as you know, has faced some real criticism for not being ready, not being prepared to act faster with a plan to protect abortion rights, knowing that this decision was likely coming. Should the administration, in your estimation, have done more in order to prepare for this so there wouldn't be so much uncertainty at this time?
I guess what I would say to that is, what in the heck was he supposed to do? You know, we have a 6-3 conservative balance on the Supreme Court. That wasn't Joe Biden's fault. The fact that we've got, during their confirmation hearings, basically crossing their fingers behind their back and not being totally truthful about Roe versus Wade. We have a 50-50 split in the Senate. We have a very slight majority in the House. So look, I'm not one of those who's going to throw Joe Biden under the bus on this. I think that, you know, where the answer is it's at it's in the voting booth. And where you had about 100 million Americans who made a decision not to vote in the last election, what I would say to all of them, if this is something that fires you up, if you want to make your own healthcare decisions, if you want to make sure that someone like Donald Trump, who from today's testimony performed some ungodly acts leading up to January 6th and on January 6th, the answer is vote. You know, I love the old President Obama line is don't get mad, vote.
Don't boo, vote. Right.
Don't boo, vote, you know, because saying boo at a rally doesn't do anybody any good. Marching over to the Supreme Court, for that matter, doesn't do any good. We've got to mobilize. And what I mean by that is we've got to get people registered to vote. And then we've got to have the biggest, best, most robust get out the vote effort in the history of our party if we want to defy history, because we really do have to defy history at this point because we've got we hold the majority in the House, the Senate, and we have a Democrat in the White House. So we've got to outperform in a lot of ways if we're going to be successful on November 8th.
And in that line of thinking, as far as outperforming with inflation and the economy still weighing on the minds of so many Americans, do you feel the Democrats should be doing more to address those specific concerns ahead of November?
Well, you know, we're in the middle of a worldwide. Our economy is being impacted worldwide at this point. We've got a war in Europe that you know we've got to do everything we can to continue to help our friends in Ukraine. But this is not something that is unique to America. What can be unique to America is to help bring down the gas prices. I always like to promote ethanol, biofuels, because I come from corn country. I've been on the agriculture committee for the last 10 years, and to President Biden's credit, he is now allowed for ethanol to be sold year round throughout the summer. And that is one way that we can start bringing down the gasoline prices. But look, I think we've got a little more than 4 months right now between now and November 8th. And every day we need to have a strike force, a task force. That old saying, we've got to get caught trying every single day and trying hard. I'm also a former college athlete and always want to win. And I know the importance of practicing hard and getting your fundamentals down. And really, when you think about elections, it's all about fundamentals. And that is, you get your base fired up, you get those who are incentivized to vote fired up. You have a great get out the vote plan, and it's having all those fundamentals down by the time November 8th rolls around. And sometimes we make it a little more complicated than it needs to be, but I think that's what this is going to be about. We got to try every single day. We've got to remind voters about if it's important to them that people can control their own healthcare decisions. If they think it's as bad as just I do anyway, on how Donald Trump behaved leading up to January 6th and post January 6th, the harm that he has done to our democracy, the longest serving democracy in the history of the world, the damage that he's done. We've got a great argument that we can make to the American public, but we have to keep making it over and over and over again and get people motivated to vote on November 8th.
All right, well, we'll see what the American public has to say soon enough. Congresswoman Cheri Bustos, we thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you coming on.
Thank you.
And of course, we just projected that Governor Kathy Hochul is the winner for the Democratic nomination for governor in New York. Let's go back to Trevor Ault, who's in New York at Hochul's campaign party. Trevor, give us a sense of what the atmosphere is like there. Prior to today, many have called her the accidental governor because she didn't obviously win the governorship here, but now it seems that she's at least halfway there tonight.
Absolutely, Lindsay. I mean, you could tell that she's certainly solidified her position, and her favorability has shown that really quickly since she's become the governor. We're actually expecting her to possibly make an appearance now that these projections are coming out here. But if anything, this is shown to be a very resounding victory and a very strong performance from Governor Kathy Hochul today. There was a lot of discussion when, as you said, she became that accidental governor, when she inherited this job as lieutenant governor. There was some discussion as to whether or not this position was going to be vulnerable, whether she, as a more moderate Democrat from Buffalo, was not necessarily going to resonate with New York voters the way that Andrew Cuomo had with his prior 3 victories. But what we're seeing so far in these early returns is that her margin of victory against her competitors is as large as Cuomo's was in the previous election. So she is showing that she has that staunch support from her Democratic base. A much larger question from what we're starting to see as these numbers come in is who her challenger is going to be come November. The Republican primary is a dead heat right now from 2 very different candidates. One of them, Congressman Lee Zeldin from Long Island. He's a bit more moderate. He has the backing of the Republican Party here in New York. He has a lot more individual donations, but also Andrew Giuliani, the son of Rudy Giuliani, running basically entirely on his ties to Donald Trump. He has been touting that explicitly in his campaign. Didn't get the endorsement of the former president, but he has that name recognition that certainly goes a long way with New York Republicans. And what we're seeing in these early returns is that those two are virtually neck and neck. What we know in New York primaries is that New York City voting results do tend to come in fairly early compared to the rest of the state, but it can be a bit of a mixed bag. That's something that I know the Hochul campaign is going to be paying attention to, because running against each of these two candidates could be a very different race. But regardless, Governor Hochul's campaign has to be very satisfied about the numbers that they've seen so far, as she now has this opportunity to go from the first woman governor of New York to the first elected woman governor of New York. Lindsay.
And of course, she's had some prominent roles lately here in New York, between the shooting in Buffalo and also the shooting on that subway in Brooklyn when it comes to gun rights there. Trevor Ault, our thanks to you reporting in to us from New York. And as we continue to take the pulse on today's top issues from both sides of the political spectrum tonight, we want to bring in former Trump official Sarah Isgur, an ABC News contributor, and Democracy for America CEO Yvette Simpson. Sarah, let's start with you and today's January 6th hearing. How do you think that pro-Trump Republican voters are reacting to today's revelations, if they were watching?
Well, since that committee wrapped up for today, we've now heard through reporting at NBC News, for instance, that the two Secret Service members that she referenced as telling her about President Trump lunging for the steering wheel, assaulting one of the Secret Service officers, are prepared to testify under oath that that did not happen. Another person that she mentioned telling her about that event also says that he is prepared to testify that he did not tell her that that happened. This really calls into question not only her credibility potentially, but the committee's itself, that they knew that there were other people they could check with to corroborate her testimony, but either failed to do so or failed to disclose during the committee hearing that perhaps those Secret Service agents that they'd already spoken to did not mention that incident.
And Yvette, in terms of the primaries and looking ahead to the general election, what could today's hearing mean for Democratic candidates?
It can mean a lot. I mean, what we know is that since the hearings have started, a lot of people are watching, and it's causing a lot of people to feel really strongly that somebody should be held accountable and that there is culpability here. I think the question will be, what will Merrick Garland do? You know, people have a fatigue around hearings because hearing after hearing and nothing happens. And this committee is, I think, trying to tee up all the evidence that they need, not only to convince the American people that something awful happened here that needs to be known and understood, but that there should be justice here. And if there is no justice, then I think all of the work that the committee has done, all the enthusiasm around getting to the truth of this and understanding how the most violent attack on our country happened will be for nothing. And so at the end of the day, what I hope is that as all this evidence comes up, which is very damning, and I'm sure we'll hear more and more as the committee continues to convene, will there be justice against Donald Trump and anyone else who enabled this activity? And I think if we can show real accountability, then we will see people motivated, hopefully in November and beyond, to challenge Republicans who were a part of this.
Yvette, let's stick with you for a moment, turning to the Supreme Court ruling to overturn Roe v. Wade. Many people are expressing some frustration with the Biden administration's slow response. I take it from your deep sigh there that perhaps you're one of those. Is this an issue that will keep Democratic voters motivated through the general elections in the fall?
You know, a lot of folks who have done a lot of work over election after election, folks like LaTosha Brown, myself, progressive folks who got folks out to support Joe Biden in the last election, even though he wasn't our first choice, we really stood behind him, are really overwhelmed, I think, with frustration about the fact that he would say that he does not support the ending the filibuster in this instance, that he continues to pass the buck as the most powerful man in the world on what he can do on this issue, even as prosecutors are stepping up, AGs are stepping up, the American Medical Association is stepping up, corporations are stepping up. We have over 2 million people in the federal government, including a very robust Department of Health and Human Services, the FDA, and the CDC, who can step in here. And we need the president to say, I'm going to put all of my political chips on the line, and we're going to end the filibuster here. We know that McConnell was able to do that in December to raise the debt ceiling and eliminated the filibuster with the help help of Democrats, we need Joe Biden to get his caucus together and do something right now. If not, the motivation, the lack of motivation we've seen so far in the midterms, which has led to two to one Republican turning out more than Democrats in the midterms so far, is only going to continue. So while people are excited about the potential that we could actually get something done here, people are outraged by what has happened. We need our president, our vice president, and the entire federal administration doing everything they can to show that they care enough to go on a limb and do something to protect women in this very important time.
Sarah, abortion has brought Republicans to the polls for decades. Are you concerned that that might change with the Supreme Court ruling?
Well, it's interesting to think that the evidence that we have, the data we have, that abortion is not going to be a debating issue on either side. You look back to McAuliffe's race for governor of Virginia. He made that probably the #2 issue in his race, ran millions of dollars of ads. He obviously came up short. But then even look most recently, just a couple weeks ago in Texas, after the leak of this opinion where people said that Roe was going to be overturned in a Democratic primary, voters voted for the last pro-life House Democrat up for re-election against his pro-choice challenger, which to me says that even Democratic voters are prioritizing other issues in this election, whether it's inflation or gas prices or baby formula, that there are simply more important issues on their mind, even if they are upset about this issue or have, changed their affiliation to be pro-choice, as we've seen in the latest Gallup polls. The most number of people in history are is pro-choice right now. But when you dig into those numbers, the people saying that who've switched their position were already voting for Democrats. And it's hard to see where this is going to change elections, if it's about turning out voters or changing voters. Where I think the possible energy will be is volunteers and we've seen Democrats do a wonderful job organizing, like Georgia in 2021 in those Senate races, using volunteers far more effectively than we've seen either party use volunteers in past races. That's where I think Democrats can really turn this issue to their advantage.
Sarah Isgur, Yvette Simpson, we thank you both for your time and insight. And when we come back, states continue to face new legal challenges over trigger laws restricting or banning abortion after that transformative ruling by the Supreme Court. How it all might impact the balance of power come November. Stay with us.
It was an extraordinary story.
A computer salesman was supposed to report to prison to begin a 17-year sentence.
They let him turn himself into jail with no escort.
No one thought he would run.
How do you evade capture for 25 years? How do you do that?
Now, join the search, following the U.S. Marshals as they uncover new leads in a global manhunt. Can you help catch this fugitive?
Have you seen this man?
Have you seen this man?
Have you seen this man? Listen and join the all-new Hunt wherever you get your podcasts.
All right, here we go. You ready? Let's do it.
Yes, it's the show America wants and America needs right now.
This is What Would You Do? Let's go. How are you?
Yeah. So what will you be watching Saturdays on ABC News Live?
What would you do?
Hey, I guess I just found out.
The What Would You Do Marathon, 12 to 6 Eastern, every Saturday on ABC News Live.
My favorite show.
This is ABC News Live.
The crush of families here in Poland.
At refugee centers.
In Putin's Russia.
On the ground in Ukraine.
Close to the front line.
Here at the White House.
Destructive Cat 4 storm.
You're along I-5.
Boston is in the bullseye.
Let's go. We made it.
ABC News Live, America's #1 streaming news. Anytime, anywhere. Streaming 24/7, straight to you for free.
Thank you for making ABC News Live America's #1 streaming news.
These days, with so much going on, it's hard to keep up.
While others are recapping yesterday's headlines,
We're bringing you the right now.
This is the busy border crossing. Steel barricades, another strike.
the right now look at the day ahead, how it affects you and your family.
Record high gas prices.
The threat of cyber warfare.
Is peace possible?
World News Now beginning at 2 a.m. Eastern, followed by America This Morning.
America's #1 early morning news.
Streaming here on ABC News Live.
Take America's #1 news with you anywhere you go, anytime, free. Download the ABC News app now. Breaking news, exclusives, 24/7. There for you with one touch. The ABC News app. Download it now.
The most powerful stories of our time, anytime. Nightline.
America's #1 news, ABC News. Most watched, most trusted, and streaming live to you anytime, anywhere, and free. This is ABC News Live, America's #1 streaming news, free to you 24/7. Watch America's #1 news whenever you want it, wherever you are, anytime. ABC News Live, streaming live and free on all platforms.
Welcome back. We turn next to the abortion battle playing out now in several states after the Supreme Court decision that overturned Roe versus Wade. Courts have stepped in to block trigger laws aimed at banning abortion immediately in some states. But how long will that last, and how could that impact the midterms? ABC's Rachel Scott has more.
Tonight, facing growing pressure, President Biden's health secretary insisted the administration is looking at every option to protect abortion rights.
There is no magic bullet. But if there is something we can do, we will find it and we will do it.
Secretary Javier Becerra outlining steps like increasing access to medication abortion, but offering few specifics. Our Mary Bruce pressing for details.
When can we expect more concrete steps to be announced? What's the holdup here?
It was a long decision, and it did upend 50 years of precedent. And so you want to make sure that what you do is within, as I said, the confines of the law. We're not interested in going rogue.
The battle over abortion rights now turns to the states. At least 13 have stopped nearly all abortions. About a dozen others set to take action in the coming weeks and months. Abortion rights demonstrators marching from Illinois to Iowa.
We have to protect our siblings who this does affect in other states.
Illinois now a safe haven, surrounded by states banning or severely restricting access to abortion, bracing for up to 30,000 more women to travel here over the year.
Patients who are struggling to make ends meet, who are deciding, do I pay my rent or do I feed my kids? And now they have this not only added expense and time of needing an abortion, but also the time they have to take off work and the childcare and the lodging. It's really heartbreaking.
So many feel that they're now without options. Our thanks to Rachel Scott. And we are joined now by former North Dakota Senator Heidi Heitkamp and Democratic strategist Xochitl Hinojosa. We thank you both for joining us tonight. You're both Democrats from red states, so want to get your read on a couple of major social policy issues facing the country right now. First, of course, the Supreme Court ruling to overturn Roe v. Wade. Both of your states have trigger laws in place. Senator, I'd like to start with you. This was an issue in your 2018 campaign. How are voters reacting to the ban there?
You know, it's interesting because I think there's a whole lot of shock because this is a right that's been protected in the Constitution. Didn't really matter what the legislature did. Didn't matter what, what was happening and what the governor said because women had a constitutional right. I want to remind people because I think this gets lost. When the abortion debate is on either extreme, you lose. And in North Dakota, when we're talking about later term abortion, when you're talking about partial birth abortion, those are things people are not comfortable with. But it wasn't that long ago in North Dakota when we rejected a personhood bill, which would have declared life at conception. Now the debate has moved there, as protesters are saying protection at conception. What does that mean for the morning after pill? What does that mean for rape and incest exceptions? And it's once these things sink in, even in very red states, I think there's going to be a lot of discomfort over the real clear impacts of this decision, even in red states. I remind you, Mississippi turned back a personhood bill because the voters there were not willing to say life begins at conception. It had too many consequences.
Such a slippery slope that we're all seeing now. Sochi, Texas certainly has different demographics than North Dakota, but on this issue, what are you hearing? How are voters there responding?
Well, I think that voters are in shock just like the rest of the country. I think that
We've seen it for quite some time where Republicans in Texas are trying to roll back women's rights, women's reproductive rights. And like the senator said, there was still this Roe v. Wade was there still to protect us. And I don't think it necessarily hit everyone until the decision dropped this last week. What I do want to warn folks, though, is that remember that Texas has a large growing Latino population. If you look at the last census, the majority of the growth came from the Hispanic community, and especially in places like South Texas. And what will happen here because of the Supreme Court decision, it will largely impact brown and Black women. These are women who will be disproportionately impacted by the decision. They will have to drive potentially hundreds or thousands of miles in order to get an abortion. And we will see consequences. You will have women who will die. And so I think that over the next, few months and years, we will see the impacts of Roe v. Wade on the Hispanic community. And one thing I will say about Texans is that while Texans are, Texas is a conservative state, I will say that Texans don't necessarily like the extreme. You've had a lot of major things happen in Texas, like this abortion ban. You've also had the recent shooting. There's a lot of things that are happening in Texas that are breaking communities apart. And this is just one instance where communities aren't necessarily liking what they see.
And for both of you, do you see this as an issue that will influence the general elections in the fall in your state? Senator, I'll start with you.
No, I mean, I think that North Dakota is a pretty red state, redder than Texas. Last election, we were a plus 35. And so I don't see, we're also a very pro-life state. And so I don't see this affecting North Dakota voters. I do see it affecting across the Red River into Minnesota, more and more people understanding the import of this, more and more people kind of picking a side who haven't picked a side before. And so in places where we are at maybe a +6 Republican, I think this could, if suburban women vote, if young women vote, if young people vote, and certainly if minorities feel that their options are being limited economically, I think that this will have a base turnout. I don't think this is going to be, you're not going to persuade some Republican to change their idea or their vote. This is really motivation. And I think in close races, this could motivate and turn the tide for Democratic candidates.
And Xochitl, Republicans have been making inroads with Latino voters in your state. Does the ruling on abortion help or hurt that?
Well, I think that we have to spend money in these communities, and that is our problem. I don't think we have a messaging problem with Hispanic voters in South Texas. I think our problem is that we're not necessarily turning them out. And that's what you saw in the district in South Texas that recently flipped from blue to red. It will end up flipping back to blue in November. But the issue that we have seen is just that the National Party isn't spending enough money to get those voters out. I do think that Roe v. Wade and abortion will be one proof point that Democrats will use against Governor Abbott and his extreme policies. You see gubernatorial candidate Beto O'Rourke really leaning in and trying to paint Abbott as extreme and using this as one proof point. There are many. There are rising prices in Texas. There are other things that are happening in Texas because of Abbott's policies, but he's definitely not shying away from it.
All right, Democratic strategist Xochitl Hinojosa, Senator Heidi Heitkamp, thank you both for joining us. And now let's go to a few more results in the Illinois Democratic House primary for District 6. ABC News can now report that Sean Casten is projected to win, defeating fellow incumbent Representative Marie Newman after redistricting lumped the two into the same district. And now to Colorado, where ABC projects Pam Anderson to win, not the actress there, but Pam Anderson with 45% of the vote, with nearly 80% of the total vote reporting. And in the Colorado 3rd District Republican primary, ABC News reports that Lauren Boebert is projected to win. Boebert is the Trump-endorsed controversy-riddled incumbent. She made headlines for wishing to carry a gun on the House floor and for making Islamophobic comments toward Representative Ilhan Omar. And back to that bombshell day of testimony on Capitol Hill. A key witness, Cassidy Hutchinson, the top aide to former President Trump's White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, revealing new information about Trump's escalating aggression that day. Joining us now is ABC News contributor Barbara Comstock. There was a great deal of shocking testimony. What stuck out to you today as perhaps the most damning?
Well, I think that, first of all, that the violence was expected from early on. She spoke about Mark Meadows and Rudy Giuliani being in a meeting, and Rudy talked about how crazy it was going to be on January 6th. And Mark Meadows then said something to the effect of, yeah, there's a lot of things going on here. But then the morning of all those threats, that they knew that people were armed and potentially dangerous there. And then during, in that tent that we all saw but didn't know what was really going on in that tent, right before the rally, that Trump himself was saying, let these people go through the magnetometers. I don't care if they're armed. They won't hurt me. Well, of course, he wasn't worried about them. It was other people who were the targets, so that he knew that these people were dangerous. He knew they were armed because they'd even taken, when they tried to go through the magnetometers, yet he directed them to go up to the Capitol anyway. So I think that this was planned. It was known that it was going to be violent, and the president knew that was going to happen, directed them up there. He very much wanted to go himself, but Secret Service wouldn't let him. But then he sat there, of course, for hours and hours and did nothing and didn't care that it was violent. So he knew it was violent, didn't care it was violent, and did nothing. And I think much more will be developed on that front in the coming hearings.
Former Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney, who served before Mark Meadows, he tweeted that he knows Cassidy Hutchinson and believes her. Do you think there are more Republicans who share that sentiment?
Oh, yes. People who I know at the White House say the same thing. And I think that it's kind of disgraceful. You think about somebody like Pat Cipollone, who hasn't come forward and testified yet. He has children near the age of Cassidy Hutchinson. What would he think if somebody forced a 25, 26-year-old young woman to have to come forward and do this because he didn't, the boss didn't have the courage to come forward and do it, whether it was Mark Meadows or Pat Cipollone. Man up, guys. Get there and testify. If we're being saved by women in this Republican Party, by Cassidy Hutchinson, by Liz Cheney, while the men are cowering under their desks like eunuchs, afraid of Donald Trump. It's embarrassing.
What do you think the likelihood is that more people from Trump's inner circle will come forward to testify? I know that you're wanting that to happen.
So, first of all, I think they should subpoena them if they don't come forward. But the problem that some of these people who aren't coming forward are going to have is there's documentary evidence that they may not know that people have yet. There are phone records. There's testimony of other witnesses besides Cassidy about what was going on that day. So these people who are waiting and hoping that, they'll be passed by when they knew what went on that day and how wrong it was, they're going to get in more legal jeopardy the longer they wait. And certainly, I think after today, both Mark Meadows and Donald Trump are in more legal jeopardy. And let's not forget, Mark Meadows and his wife are accused of fraudulently voting in North Carolina, so they have that problem too.
Okay, all right, Barbara Comstock, we thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate your insight as always. And we are going to reset at this point. I'm Lindsay Davis. Thanks so much for streaming with us. All of the polls for today's primary elections are now closed. Voters casting their ballots the same day as bombshell testimony unfolded in Washington in a surprise January 6th hearing. Cassidy Hutchinson, former top aide to then White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, said former President Trump knew some of the rally-goers were armed and was not concerned about the risk in going to the Capitol because they were on his side. Meanwhile, in the wake of the Supreme Court decision overturning Roe v. Wade, the battle over abortion rights now turns to the states. At least 13 states have stopped nearly all abortion services. About a dozen others are set to take action in the coming weeks and months. Votes were cast here in New York, in Oklahoma, Colorado, Illinois, Utah, and Mississippi and South Carolina. There were runoff elections and one special election in Nebraska. Let's go back to ABC News political director, Mr. Rick Klein, for more. Rick, what's catching your eye so far as these primary results continue to come in?
Yeah, Lindsay, in the wake of the Roe v. Wade ruling, we've had our eyes particularly on some states that have Democratic governors and therefore abortion protections, states like Colorado, Illinois, and New York, specifically to look at what kind of Republicans are lining up against them. And we're seeing the tale of two different Republican parties in some of these races. In both Illinois and in Colorado, the Democrats were actually spending money to try to boost the candidacy of the farthest right opponent. That strategy appears to have paid off in the state of Illinois, where the state senator Darren Bailey, who's endorsed by Trump, was just appearing with Trump over the weekend, has won the nomination over Richard Irvin. It gives Governor Pritzker there a bit of a leg up potentially, but it's a high-risk strategy in his race for the fall. Meanwhile, in Colorado, you're seeing the establishment pull off some wins. We already saw Tina Peters, who was running for Secretary of State there, despite the fact that she's facing legal charges for election improprieties. She can't even oversee the elections locally that she was appointed to. She lost in her primary to a more moderate or middle-of-the-road Secretary of State candidate. And so far there, at least, we're seeing Joe O'Dea seem to prevail in the Colorado Senate primary. He is, again, more of the mainstream candidate up against Ron Hanks, who's an election denier that Democrats were trying to boost. So you're seeing some Trump endorsements work. You're also seeing some big lie-supporting candidates win. But in Colorado, maybe a bit of a different story, which may leave it as more of a key battleground this fall.
And New York Governor Kathy Hochul projected to win her primary tonight as she waits to see who she'll face off with in the fall.
Yeah, and so far, I mean, Governor Hochul, there was a lot of talk about whether she would be able to prevail after becoming governor in that surprise resignation of Andrew Cuomo. She locked down the nomination pretty easily. Now the question is who she runs against. In the returns we've seen so far, Congressman Lee Zeldin is leading against Andrew Giuliani and some others. Lee Zeldin represents this district on Long Island. By the way, my mom and dad live right about there. That's where I grew up, Lindsay. And if Lee Zeldin wins, he wins with the Pence endorsement, not necessarily the Trump endorsement. You see a state like New York, very, very blue at the national level. Most of the population centers trend Democratic, but there's always Republican opportunities. A year like this is a year that Republicans start to hope about what they can do in the Empire State.
It looks like you're right on the border of the red and blue, right in Long Island, right?
Right where you belong. That's right, exactly.
All right, political director Rick Klein, our thanks to you as always. And now let's go back to Colorado and ABC's Zareen Shaw from the Denver Election Division. Zareen, you're now in the room where the votes are being tallied. Give us a sense of what you're seeing there. I know you were telling us earlier, lots of transparency, lots of glass windows.
There's a lot of transparency in this room, Lindsay. But first, let me actually tell you some of the projected winners and some of the people who are leading. We have some of those results right now. So the projected winner in the Secretary of State's race, you mentioned it a bit ago, Pam Anderson, not the actress. She's the one who does not believe the election was stolen. In third place is Tina Peters. She got a lot of press over just how controversial she was. She was the election denier in that race. In the Senate race, John O'Dea is leading in the Republican race. And in the governor's race, Heidi Ganahl is leading in that race. So basically the takeaway is that in those statewide races, the moderate Republican is leading or has been a projected winner in those specific races. So right now we are in the room where the votes have been tallied, are being tallied, and you can see there's a lot of transparency here. Well, first of all, I'll show you there are these machines behind me, quite a few of them. A lot of the tallying has already happened. But that machine where that gentleman is standing, you can see the big one right there. It can count up to 20,000 votes an hour. And if we pan around here, this entire room is just filled with cameras. They actually live stream 24/7. So if you're sitting at home, you can see exactly what's happening in this room. And then you have these windows right here. There's two of them. Any member of the public can come here and they can watch this entire process take place. And there's also a counting room flowchart here. I will not excite you with all of those details, but it's a fascinating process here, Lindsay.
And let's talk about some of tonight's races in particular. I know you just ran through several of them, but in particular, tracking the House race for conservative Congresswoman Lauren Boebert. Explain some of the dynamics playing out there.
That one was a really interesting one. Look, she is the projected winner right now, but I want to tell you something that happened in her district. First of all, she is, of course, very controversial. She wanted to bring a gun on the House floor. She had Islamophobic comments towards a Muslim colleague. She was endorsed by Donald Trump, and Democrats really, really wanted her out, to the point where 4,600 Democrats left their party in her district. That might seem really confusing, But at the very same time, independence skyrocketed in her district. And so at this point, you have almost 4% of Democrats leaving. You have independents skyrocketing. And experts call this strategic crossover voting. And the idea is that they predict that a lot of those previously Democratic voters, now independents, would vote for her opponent. In that case, it was Don Coram. He was a much more moderate Republican. Of course, we see that did not happen. She is in a very, very deep red district, and she won her last election by about 10,000 votes.
And give us a sense of where Colorado stands on abortion in particular, how some voters there are reacting to the Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe v. Wade.
It's one of the most liberal states when it comes to abortion, especially the laws here, right? A woman can have an abortion at any point in her pregnancy here. There is no waiting period, but this state is surrounded by other states that are seeing a lot of restrictions when it comes to abortions, or that will see a lot of restrictions. States like Utah, Wyoming, Oklahoma, Texas. So they're expecting a big influx. But when we spoke to voters today, mind you, we are in Denver. There are a lot of liberal voters here. They were really concerned about this issue. Take a listen to what they said.
I mean, the overturning of Roe versus Wade is crazy. It just makes it feels like an attack on women.
It feels almost powerless whenever we have a Supreme Court that our voice is being heard.
Now, in this very state, they recently worked to expand abortion access. They saw that the Roe v. Wade reversal may be coming many, many months ago. And so Democratic lawmakers worked to enshrine abortion rights into the state law that was recently signed just back in April by the governor here. And so they have even more rights when it comes to abortion right here in this state. Lindsay.
All right, Zoreen Shah reporting in from Colorado for us. Thank you so much, Zoreen. Landmark decisions from the Supreme Court on abortion and guns could now have a big impact on this year's midterms, as we've been discussing. For more on that, let's bring in Amelia Thompson-DeVoe, a senior writer for our partners at 538. Amelia, thank you so much for joining us. The decision by the court's conservative majority overturning Roe v. Wade has certainly sent shockwaves across the country. So what do the polls show as far as how Americans view the decision to send abortion rights back to the states and how they view restrictions on abortion access?
Yeah, so far, polls are showing that a majority of Americans do not approve of the Supreme Court's ruling. According to a recent Monmouth University poll, 60% of Americans disapprove of the justice's decision to overturn Roe, while only 37% approve. And in the Monmouth poll, we also saw that 66% of Americans said abortion should always be legal or legal with some limitations. 22% said it should be illegal with exceptions, and 10% said it should always be illegal. So really not very many people in that last category. That doesn't represent a huge shift from before the decision. Those numbers are very similar to what they found in their last few polls. And it's the same for the perspective on Roe. An ABC News Washington Post poll released in May also found that 54% of Americans wanted the court to uphold Roe, and only 28% said they wanted the court to overturn it, which is fairly consistent with what the polls from after the ruling are finding as well.
And before abortion, the court also made that major decision on gun rights. How significant do you feel that decision was, and what does it mean for gun rights across the country?
So it's been a little dwarfed by the abortion news, but yes, last week the Supreme Court also issued a big gun rights decision. In that ruling, the court's 6 conservative justices said for the first time that the Second Amendment right to bear arms covers the right to carry a handgun in public. And they struck down a New York law that had required people who wanted a concealed carry permit to show a good reason for acquiring the permit. 5 other states in the District of Columbia have similar laws. That might not seem like very many states, but they're very populous states. So about a quarter of the country lives in a state that will be affected. To be clear, the justices did say that it's still okay for states to have some kind of licensing requirement. It just can't be as restrictive as New York's, but there are a lot of questions to be worked out here. And the court changed its legal standard for assessing whether a gun regulation is constitutional. So I think we're going to see a lot of legal challenges coming down the pike.
And what kind of impact could these hot-button social issues on both guns and abortion have on the midterms? Or is it likely that the economy and inflation could still be the overriding issues come November?
Yeah, so we're obviously pretty far out from November. Gun violence is very much on Americans' minds right now, but I don't know if this specific Supreme Court ruling will change things. It's just not going to alter Americans' lives in a very tangible way, especially before November. Abortion is different. Obviously, we're seeing changes on that now, and it does seem to be already motivating some voters. There are states like Pennsylvania where literally abortion access could hinge on who wins a midterm race. But the economy and the inflation are so prominent in voters' minds right now. I do think it's possible that those will continue to be the top issues for voters as we move toward November. We'll just have to see what happens.
538 senior writer Amelia Thompson DeVoe, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
More primary coverage right after the break. Stay with us.
All right, here we go. You ready? Let's do it.
Yes, it's the show America wants and America needs right now.
This is What Would You Do? Let's go. How are you?
Yeah. So what will you be watching Saturdays on ABC News Live?
What would you do?
Hey, I guess I just found out.
The What Would You Do Marathon, 12 to 6 Eastern, every Saturday on ABC News Live.
My favorite show.
This is ABC News Live.
The crushing of families here in Poland.
At refugee centers.
In Putin's Russia.
On the ground in Ukraine.
Close to the front line.
Here at the White House.
Destructive Cat 4 storm.
You're along I-5.
Boston is in the bullseye.
Let's go. We made it.
ABC News Live, America's #1 streaming news. Anytime, anywhere. Streaming 24/7, straight to you for free.
Thank you for making ABC News Live America's #1 streaming news.
America is being poisoned with fentanyl, and we don't even know it.
Just heard my wife screaming. She told me they had just died.
50 to 100 times more potent than morphine.
Keep breathing, come on.
It's poison. It's pure poison.
A few grains of salt worth of fentanyl will kill you.
Just my agency has seized enough to kill the entire country.
ABC News Live presents Poisoned, America's Fentanyl Crisis. The powerful series, streaming free on ABC News Live.
These days, with so much going on, it's hard to keep up.
While others are recapping yesterday's headlines,
We're bringing you the right now. This is the busy border crossing. Steel barricades, another strike.
the right now look at the day ahead, how it affects you and your family.
Record high gas prices.
The threat of cyber warfare.
Is peace possible?
World News Now beginning at 2 a.m. Eastern, followed by America This Morning,
America's #1 early morning news.
streaming here on ABC News Live.
Take America's #1 news with you anywhere you go, anytime, free. Download the ABC News app now. Breaking news, exclusives, 24/7. There for you with one touch. The ABC News app. Download it now.
As of today, in a big way, we have inaugurated abcnews.com.
A lot has changed in our world since Peter made that announcement. But what hasn't changed is the commitment to groundbreaking reporting and innovation at abcnews.com. And here's to everything ahead.
Welcome back, everyone. Our primary night coverage continues. Democratic Representative Danny Davis has represented Chicago's staunchly Democratic West Side for 25 years. He's facing a challenge from 31-year-old community organizer Keena Collins in today's primary. It's a race that many are saying reflects the generational divide facing the Democratic Party at large. Representative Davis joins us now. Congressman, thank you so much for talking with us. President Biden has endorsed you, praising your work bringing community health clinics to your district. Many people are calling for swifter action from the president and Congress in response to the Supreme Court's ruling to overturn Roe v. Wade. What measures do you plan to push for in Congress?
Well, this is the tightest race that I've ever been in. And what it really means to me and what it means to the people who are good, solid Democrats is that we really all need to be working together. We need to be unified. We need to be going after other parties and other individuals and groups who don't share the same values that we share. We need a majority in the United States of America. And so it's very important to me that we close these divides, that we forget about the generational differences and come together as unifying forces and unify our party, unify our thoughts and actions so that we can defeat the other party. We don't have as much difference between ourselves as we have between our party and the other party. And so I'm on a unification kick. I believe that in unity there is strength, and in unity there is opportunity. We've got all of these issues now. They take away of Roe v. Wade, the denial of health care for individuals who need it just on the basis of health, not on the basis of anything else. And so I'm about trying to help unify Democrats so that we can be more successful than what we've already been.
Illinois is, of course, a safe haven state. How important of an issue is that for your constituents?
Well, it's a very important issue. Illinois is a state that continues to move. We've had great leadership in our state, but we have to maintain and come together because, of course, if we don't, then, of course, rather than moving forward, we will be going backwards. I don't want to go backwards. People don't want to go backwards. We want to go ahead. We want to move forward, and we've got some hard work to do to reinstitute some of the gains that we've made over the last 50 years that are being taken away from us, and we cannot allow that to happen.
I'd like to ask you about this generational divide issue. The Chicago Tribune endorsed your opponent. The paper said that it might be time for new blood. Do you feel that there might be any point there? Does the party need a new generation of leaders to galvanize a new generation of voters? As we've said, your opponent is 31. You'll be 81, conversely, come Election Day.
Well, the blood is constantly flowing, and it's constantly changing. It has never stopped changing. There are a large number of young individuals in my congressional district, some of them that I've been a mentor to and for, who are ready to step in, who are ready to take the lead, who are really ready to keep moving. I don't know all that much, that just on the basis of age and tenure and engagement and involvement, things that worked when we managed to get Roe v. Wade instituted, that will work again today. When we got Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security, those tactics are the same. There's no difference in making use of a unified group to foster in the changes that we know need to take place. So I'm not sure that this generational idea is something that has to split our party and alter our thinking and deny the successes that we have been known for and good for America. So I think we need everybody. We need everybody in the fray. And this is a defining moment, but I think in the end, unification is really the key, and that's where we need to be headed.
And lastly, just in the short amount of time that we have here, I want to ask you about the other big issue on the heels of recent events and rising crime rates is gun violence. It's an issue that you and many of your constituents are all too familiar with there. How do you turn the tide on rising gun deaths?
Well, of course, Democrats in Illinois have been fighting crime with every ounce of energy, strength, tooth and nail. City of Chicago has had some ordinances that have been struck down by the Supreme Court. And so we need as much national action as we can possibly get. I think I've signed on to hundreds, quite frankly, of bills designed to decrease violence and fight crime. But many of those bills never saw the light of day when they got to the Senate. And so we need a comprehensive approach, and we've got to elect people in all of our states who can agree on these issues. Yeah, it's a big issue in Illinois, but we also got issues coming out of the Supreme Court that have not helped, I think, but have hurt.
Representative Danny Davis, thank you so much for your time, sir.
Thank you very much.
Let's go now to our Deputy Political Director, Avery Harper. Avery, we're seeing an unusual alliance from the election cycle, Trump-friendly candidates and Democratic-aligned groups spending to boost far-right candidates. Explain why that's happening.
Right. It is a symbiotic relationship of sorts. We're seeing a lot of Democratic groups putting money into ads, boosting far-right candidates. And it's really not a new trick. It is something that Democratic candidates and Democratic groups have used in the past. The effort is to choose a more extreme candidate in an effort to go up against them in the general election rather than going against a moderate candidate that might be tougher competition. But what's new this time around is the fact that there are lots of candidates who are espousing election lies about the 2020 election. It is the notion of our democracy really being on the line. And so there are lots of folks who are pointing to this and saying that it is like playing with fire. And that's if it works at all. If you look at the Colorado GOP primary that we've been watching really closely tonight, there was lots of money put behind the candidate Ron Hanks. But we don't think that that is going to be working this time around because we've already seen the other candidate. We've seen Joe O'Dea, who has been leading the entire night. ABC has not yet projected a winner in that race, but he's already declaring victory tonight. But again, there are lots of folks who are pointing to this and saying that this could be a really dangerous game to play as we're seeing lots of these candidates with far-right ideals.
And you traveled to Illinois to profile a House race that's now up for grabs because of one of the many House Democratic retirements this year. Explain what you saw on the ground there with that contest.
Right. I went to Illinois 17th District, and this is really a rural area. There are lots of counties within this district that are what we call pivot counties, counties that went for Obama back in 2012 and went for Trump in 2016 and 2020. And so what we're seeing there is Esther Joy King. She's a Republican candidate who has been leading and has really been dominating in her primary tonight. She's coming back for a second time after losing narrowly to Congresswoman Cheri Bustos, and she is hoping to take advantage of what she described to me as a red shift. She said there's lots of folks in that district who voted Democrat for years and for generations even, and she's seeing folks that are dissatisfied with the direction of this country, especially when you are looking at issues of the economy and inflation. Still, there are Democrats in a very crowded primary there who are hoping to get the chance to go up against whoever is going to be the Republican candidate there, hoping to keep that seat blue. We'll have to see what happens there tonight.
We will. Avery Harper, our thanks to you as always.
Thank you.
And still to come, final thoughts from ABC News political director Rick Klein on this primary night. We'll be right back.
With so much at stake in our world right now, we wanted to thank you for your trust and for making ABC News America's #1 news.
And thank you for making ABC News Live America's #1 streaming news.
Now streaming on ABC News Live 2020. True crime, cinematic, real-life drama, stunning, the unthinkable. Follow the clues. The Hunt. True crime 2020. Now streaming on ABC News Live.
National parks are incredibly safe places. Crime will happen.
Hey, Mama. My wife is fallen. She's in really critical condition.
At that time, I thought it was just a tragic accident. There's still a lot of questions we need to ask.
There were small things that didn't totally add up.
This is 2 lives for Harold that have died now. I was shocked. Something's not right.
Admit it. These days, what you need to know
Seems to change just about every day.
what is it that you really want to know, need to know,
To help you not just get through your day,
but to make the most of it. Feel smarter.
feel better.
Feel happier.
Well, how about a third hour of Good Morning America?
GMA 3, what you need to know. Now streaming on ABC News Live. It's all about you.
I know what happened, and I'm not guilty.
Why the fascination with criminal trials? Figure out what's really out there.
She revealed she had murdered his family.
I know in my heart they did this.
It's the time of suspicion. The ending's really tough.
You don't know whether truth is going to be difficult to find unless you try to find it.
America's #1 news, ABC News. Most watched, most trusted, and streaming live to you anytime, anywhere, and free. This is ABC News Live, America's #1 streaming news, free to you 24/7. Watch America's #1 news whenever you want it, wherever you are, anytime. ABC News Live, streaming live and free on all platforms.
Welcome back, everyone. Now to more results. You just heard our deputy political director mention this race in the last few moments. We got a projection in the Colorado Republican Senate primary. ABC News projects that Joe O'Dea, construction company executive, will win the nomination there. And in the Colorado Republican governor primary, ABC News projects Heidi Ganahl to win with 53% of the vote, 80% of the expected vote currently reported. And now let's go back to ABC News political director Rick Klein. And Rick, earlier you were talking about some of the House incumbents in danger of losing their seats. How have they fared tonight?
Yeah, we were just getting some news on that just in the last couple of moments, Lindsay. Out of the state of Illinois, there's 2 primaries that we were watching where you had incumbents running against each other, and we do have results to report in both of those. Here in the 15th congressional district, a very Republican district, takes this kind of weird shape. Redistricting put 2 incumbents against each other, and just in the last few minutes, we had a concession from Congressman Rodney Davis, and that means that Congresswoman Mary Miller, who got the Trump endorsement and had a really controversial appearance where she appeared to thank President Trump for his victory for white life over the weekend. She said she misspoke, roiled that race. She won anyway, and with the Trump endorsement. And here, right outside Chicago, in the suburbs of Chicago, you had 2 Democrats running against each other. Marie Newman, Congresswoman who won because she was seen as a protector of abortion rights in the last election cycle. She actually lost tonight to Sean Casten, a fellow incumbent. So that's where we've seen some incumbents lose. Meanwhile, in Mississippi, there were 2 incumbents on the ballot. One of them winning, the other one losing. So kind of a rough night for incumbents across the board in some unpredictable ways. Trumpism winning some places and not winning in some others.
And what are some of the dynamics that are playing out tonight that could have an impact on November?
Yeah, the biggest storyline of the night is in the statewide races. You've got big states with Democratic governors, including Colorado, Illinois, and New York, all have their big primaries tonight. And you had something of a split decision. In Illinois, the Democratic Party spent heavily to boost the candidate of a far-right candidate. That candidate won the nomination with the help of that money, and it leaves Governor Pritzker, who won renomination tonight, in a stronger position than he might have been, although the candidate might be, from the Democrats' perspective, a little more dangerous in terms of his views. But the Colorado, you saw the establishment strike back. All of the major races ended up being carried by more moderate-minded candidates. You mentioned Heidi Ganahl. She was running up against Greg Lopez, who was associated more with fringe elements of the party. The Democrats were hoping that he would win. Instead, Heidi Ganahl is going to be the candidate against Governor Polis. Joe O'Dea is going to be the candidate for Senate against Michael Bennet, up against Ron Hanks, a state senator there that the Democrats are boosting, even though he's an election denier. And maybe in the most impactful of the races of the night, Tina Peters, who was running for Secretary of State, a full-blown election denier. She's actually under indictment for some of the extracurricular activities she did in terms of, she says, was in service of trying to investigate the last election. She lost, despite getting the support of Mike Lindell of MyPillow fame and some others. She's not going to be the nominee for Secretary of State. So I think those results in Colorado very much put that state in play at the statewide level, in the governor's race as well as the Senate race. Republicans, from the perspective of actually winning elections in a state like Colorado that's trended a little bit toward blue, did much better than they would have expected. maybe a little worse than expected in Illinois as we continue to wait on some of the final results in places like New York and elsewhere.
All right, Rick Klein, our thanks to you as always. And a few last results before we go in the Utah Republican Senate primary. ABC News projects Mike Lee to win. You see him there with 58% of the vote, just a little more than half of the expected total vote reporting at this point. And in the Illinois Republican House primary for District 15, ABC News projects that Mary Miller will win with 57% of the vote over Rodney Davis with 43%. And that is our show for tonight. Be sure to stay tuned to ABC News Live for more context and analysis of the day's top stories. World News Tonight is next, and after that, a re-air of that explosive January 6th committee hearing. I'm Lindsay Davis in New York. Thanks so much for streaming with us. Have a great night.
With so much at stake, so much on the line, more Americans turn here than any place else. ABC News World News Tonight with David Muir, America's #1 most watched newscast, now streaming on ABC News Live.
Elizabeth Holmes found guilty on 4 counts of fraud, facing the possibility of decades in prison. Now, we take you inside the courtroom and behind the scenes. The Dropout, Elizabeth Holmes on Trial. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
National parks are incredibly safe places. Crime will happen.
Hey, my wife is fallen. She's in really critical condition.
At that time, I thought it was just a tragic accident.
There's still a lot of questions we need to ask.
There were small things that didn't totally add up.
This is 2 lives for Harold that have died now. I was shocked. Something's not right.
Admit it. These days, what you need to know
Seems to change just about every day.
What is it that you really want to know, need to know,
To help you not just get through your day,
but to make the most of it? Feel smarter,
feel better.
feel happier.
Well, how about a 3rd hour of Good Morning America?
GMA 3, what you need to know. Now streaming on ABC News Live. It's all about you.
America's #1 news, ABC News. Most watched, most trusted, and streaming live to you anytime, anywhere, and free. This is ABC News Live, America's #1 streaming news, free to you 24/7. Watch America's #1 news whenever you want it, wherever you are, anytime. ABC News Live, streaming live and free on all platforms.
Tonight, the revealing testimony before the American people, a former White House aide inside the West Wing, describing former President Trump the morning of January 6th, saying he wanted security to allow armed protesters into his speech. And she testified that she was told the former president later in the presidential SUV lunged at a Secret Service agent when the president was told they could not take him to the Capitol. Cassidy Hutchinson, a top aide to former President Trump's former chief of staff, Mark Meadows, whose own desk was just down the hall from the Oval Office, testifying about the crucial days just before January 6th, and then about the day itself. There for the president's speech at the Ellipse that morning, she said she heard the president say, "Let the protesters who are armed in. Get rid of the magnetometers." The president saying, "They're not here to hurt me." She testified after his speech, the president back in the presidential SUV, that he wanted them to take him to the Capitol. And what happened next? She testified the former president, she was told, reached for the wheel. Tonight here, our team asking the Secret Service for reaction at what we're learning already. Also, that White House aide testifying her own boss, former Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, and Rudy Giuliani, both asked for pardons after January 6th. And tonight, how the former president is now responding. Jonathan Karl and Pierre Thomas standing by. Also tonight, the death toll rising in Texas. Authorities now believe the deadliest human smuggling operation in U.S. history. At least 51 people now dead in San Antonio. Tonight, what we're learning about what was discovered inside that truck. Tonight, the abortion battle now on the state level. Some states with trigger laws looking to ban abortion immediately, halted by the courts, at least for now. The Amtrak derailment in Missouri, the train from Los Angeles to Chicago, and tonight the death toll growing and what we've now learned about that scene. The war in Ukraine, President Zelensky sharing new images tonight showing the moment Russian missiles hit that shopping mall. The images of people nearby in fear, one person grabbing a child to hide. At least 20 people killed, rescuers searching for possible survivors. Ghislaine Maxwell sentenced for child sex trafficking related to Jeffrey Epstein, what the judge decided today. Tonight, hear the pandemic, and late today, the FDA advisors voting in favor of updated boosters this fall that would target the Omicron variant. And America Strong tonight, the high school graduates and the emergency call just moments after getting their diplomas.
From ABC News World Headquarters in New York, this is World News Tonight with David Muir.
Good evening, and it's great to have you with us here on this Tuesday night. And we begin with the dramatic testimony at the 6th public hearing of the January 6th investigation, scheduled just 24 hours ago to present what the committee called recently obtained evidence and a key witness, Cassidy Hutchinson, the top aide to former President Trump's White House Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows. Hutchinson testifying before the American people today that White House officials were aware that there was a risk of violence on January 6th, that former President Trump was aware that some in his crowd for a speech the morning of January 6th were armed, that he wanted security to let them in, to get rid of the magnetometers. The president then urging the crowd to go to the Capitol. And she testified that the former president wanted to go to the Capitol too, and what she says she was told, how he reacted when the Secret Service told him they were taking him back to the White House instead, telling him it wasn't safe. She says she was told he lunged at the Secret Service agent. Cassidy Hutchinson, 26 years old, she sat just down the hall from the Oval Office. A loyal Trump aide, she testified about when she became concerned, scared about what could happen on January 6th. The disturbing incidents she says she witnessed. 4 days before January 6th, she said she escorted Rudy Giuliani out of the White House and that he asked her if she was excited about January 6th, saying the president would be going to the Capitol. When she asked her own boss, former Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, about that, she testified he said there's a lot going on and things might get real bad on January 6th. Then on the morning of January 6th, she testified reports started coming in of armed people at and near the rally. The committee revealing law enforcement reporting seeing pistols, rifles, even AR-15s. Then Hutchinson testifying the former president was irate that the area wasn't full, saying he didn't care that they have weapons. They're not here to hurt me. Let them in. Hutchinson testifying that the lead Secret Service agent, Robert Engel, and Deputy Chief of Staff Tony Ornato replayed what happened inside that motorcade when the president wanted to go to the Capitol after his speech. When he was told they were taking him back to the White House, how he reacted. ABC's chief Washington correspondent Jonathan Karl leading us off tonight.
Her name is Cassidy Hutchinson. She just turned 26, and today she told the American people what she witnessed from her vantage point just steps away from the Oval Office as the top aide to Chief of Staff Mark Meadows. She testified that on January 2nd, as she escorted Rudy Giuliani from a White House meeting, he told her Donald Trump was planning to go to the Capitol himself on January 6th.
He looked at me and said something to the effect of, "Cass, are you excited for the 6th? It's going to be a great day." I remember looking at him and saying, "Rudy, could you explain what's happening on the 6th? He had responded something to the effect of, "We're going to the Capitol. It's going to be great. The president's going to be there. He's going to look powerful. He's going to be with the members. He's going to be with the senators. Talk to the chief about it. Talk to the chief about it. He knows about it."
And did you go back then up to the West Wing and tell Mr. Meadows about your conversation with Mr. Giuliani?
I did. He didn't look up from his phone and said something to the effect of, "There's a lot going on, Cass, but I don't know. Things might get real bad on January 6th. That evening was the first moment that I remember feeling scared.
Then, the morning of January 6th, Hutchinson testified Meadows was told there were weapons in the crowd.
Where I remember Tony mentioning knives, guns in the form of pistols and rifles, bear spray, body armor, spears, and flagpoles. Spears were one item, flagpoles were one item, and then Tony had relayed to me something to the effect of, "And these effing people are fastening spears onto the ends of flagpoles."
The committee played police radio traffic from that morning, backing up the reports of armed protesters.
I got 3 men walking down the street in fatigue while carrying AR-15.
As Trump got to the Ellipse for his rally outside the White House, he was angry that more of the crowd wasn't allowed inside the secure area around the stage. Some apparently stayed outside the security perimeter because they didn't want to give up their weapons.
He wanted it full, and he was angry that we weren't letting people through the mags with weapons. I overheard the president say something to the effect of, I don't effing care that they have weapons. They're not here to hurt me. Take the effing mags away. Let my people in. They can march to the Capitol from here. Let the people in. Take the effing mags away.
Hutchinson testified that White House counsel Pat Cipollone was adamant that Trump not go to the Capitol.
Mr. Cipollone said something to the effect of, please make sure we don't go up to the Capitol, Cassidy. Keep in touch with me. We're going to get charged with every crime imaginable if we make that movement happen.
Thank you very much.
But Hutchinson said Trump was not willing to take no for an answer. And after his speech was over, he ordered the presidential vehicle to take him to Capitol Hill. But lead Secret Service agent Robert Engel refused. Hutchinson testified she saw him and Deputy Chief of Staff Tony Ornato just after they returned to the White House with an angry President Trump.
And I noticed Bobby Engel, who is the head of Mr. Trump's security detail, sitting in a chair, just looking somewhat discombobulated and a little lost.
Hutchinson said that she was told that when the president got into the car, he believed he was heading to the Capitol.
So once the president had gotten into the vehicle with Bobby, he thought that they were going up to the Capitol. And when Bobby had relayed to him, we don't have the assets to do it. It's not secure. We're going back to the West Wing. The president had very strong, a very angry response to that. Tony described him as being irate. The president said something to the effect of, I'm the effing president, take me up to the Capitol now. To which Bobby responded, sir, we have to go back to the West Wing. The president reached up towards the front of the vehicle to grab at the steering wheel. Mr. Engel grabbed his arm, said, sir, you need to take your hand off the steering wheel. We're going back to the West Wing. We're not going to the Capitol. Mr. Trump then used his free hand to lunge towards Bobby Engel. And when Mr. Ornato had recounted this story to me, he had motioned towards his clavicles.
It wasn't the first time Trump had exploded in rage. Hutchinson described seeing what happened a month earlier after Attorney General Bill Barr declared that there was no significant fraud in the election.
Ms. Hutchinson, how did the president react to hearing that news?
I first noticed there was ketchup dripping down the wall, and there's a shattered porcelain plate on the floor. The valet had articulated that the president was extremely angry at the Attorney General's AP interview and had thrown his lunch against the wall.
And Ms. Hutchinson, was this the only instance that you are aware of where the president threw dishes?
It's not. There were several times throughout my tenure with the Chief of Staff that I was aware of him either throwing dishes or flipping the tablecloth to let all the contents of the table go onto the floor and likely break or go everywhere.
And on January 6th, even after he returned to the White House, Trump still wanted to join the march to the Capitol.
He said he wanted to physically walk with the marchers. He wanted to be a part of the march in some fashion.
But he did not go, and his supporters soon breached the Capitol building. Hutchinson said Chief of Staff Meadows initially did nothing.
I said, "You watching the TV, Chief?" He was like, "Yeah." "The rioters are getting really close. Have you talked to the president?" He said, "No, he wants to be alone right now."
Then the White House counsel came rushing in.
And I remember Pat saying to him something to the effect of, "The rioters have gotten to the Capitol, Mark. We need to go down and see the president now." And Mark looked up at him and said, "He doesn't want to do anything, Pat."
Trump was even unmoved by his supporters chanting, "Hang Mike Pence."
I remember Pat saying something to the effect of, "Mark, we need to do something more. They're literally calling for the vice president to be effing hung." And Mark had responded something to the effect of, "You heard him, Pat. He thinks Mike deserves it. He doesn't think they're doing anything wrong." To which Pat said something, This is effing crazy.
The committee pointed out it's almost exactly what Trump told me 6 weeks after he left the White House.
Because it's common sense, John. It's common sense that you're supposed to protect. How can you, if you know a vote is fraudulent, right? Yeah. How can you pass on a fraudulent vote to Congress?
At the end of the hearing today, Cassidy Hutchinson was asked about her own boss, Mark Meadows, and about Rudy Giuliani, who had told her January 6th would be a great day. She said both wanted presidential pardons.
Ms. Hutchinson, did White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows ever indicate that he was interested in receiving a presidential pardon related to January 6th?
Mr. Meadows did seek that pardon. Yes, ma'am.
And John Karl was on the air with me all afternoon, back with us tonight. And John, former President Trump responding to today's testimony saying, quote, he hardly knows who Cassidy Hutchinson is. But John, the committee did show the American people the West Wing, her desk just down the hall from the Oval Office, right outside Mark Meadows' office, often right by Meadows' side.
Just steps away from the president, David. But the former president issued a flurry of statements while the hearing was still underway, attacking Cassidy Hutchinson, denying what she said. Two things are clear. One, Donald Trump was watching this hearing. And the second thing is that Cassidy Hutchinson's testimony clearly struck a nerve with him.
And John, we're also hearing tonight from the former chief of staff before Mark Meadows, Mick Mulvaney, who tweeted that he knows Cassidy Hutchinson and that he believes her.
He said that, and Mulvaney said that the testimony was explosive, and he predicted that others close to Trump, as a result of this testimony, would be testifying themselves soon.
John Karl leading us off here tonight. John, thank you. And one more question on this. So let's bring in our Chief Justice correspondent, Pierre Thomas, because this was a significant piece of testimony, Pierre. Cassidy Hutchinson saying she was told that the former president lunged at that Secret Service agent in the presidential SUV. Curious what the Secret Service is saying about all this tonight.
David, the Secret Service so far is not commenting on specifics, but just informed me that they would like to respond under oath. Two sources familiar with the investigation confirmed that President Trump had requested to go to the Capitol on January 6th and that the Secret Service refused due to security concerns. One of those sources telling me that the president did return to the vehicle after his speech on the morning of January 6th and asked Agent Robert Engel if he could go to the Capitol. Engel said something to the effect of that being unwise or dangerous and that the motorcade was going to take the president back to the White House. A source close to the Secret Service just told me to expect that the Secret Service will push back against any allegation of an assault against an agent or President Trump reaching for the steering wheel, David. Just got that in.
Very interesting. So that exchange that was described today, the Secret Service wants to answer that under oath. So we'll wait for that development coming. Pierre Thomas with late reporting. Our thanks to you and to John Karl tonight. Thank you both. In the meantime, we move on now to the other major headlines this Tuesday night and what authorities now believe is the deadliest human smuggling operation in U.S. history. The death toll growing, and it is staggering tonight. At least 51 people now dead in San Antonio. Tonight, what we're learning here about what was discovered inside that truck, a worker making the gruesome discovery. The horrific scene on a remote Texas road, a tractor trailer packed with dozens of migrants, most of them dying in triple-digit heat. And first responders saying the survivors were close to death themselves. ABC's chief national correspondent Matt Gupman in San Antonio tonight.
Tonight, first responders describing a tractor trailer filled with death.
The floor of the trailer was covered with dead bodies.
That tractor trailer carrying migrants abandoned on this rural road in southwest San Antonio Monday evening. The driver had fled.
It was a horrific scene, something I'll never forget.
Some of the victims had made it out of the truck only to collapse on the road. First responders checking the bodies one by one.
We put a monitor on every single one of those people to make sure that there were no signs of life. And
just to be 100% sure.
Just to be 100% sure.
Tonight, there are 13 survivors.
How close to death were these living patients? Very close. They were extremely critical.
Now facing organ failure from severe heat stroke and exhaustion. Temperatures as high as 103 degrees in San Antonio Monday. The city on track to have its warmest June on record.
Those people suffered. The heat was torrential. There was no air in that vehicle. There was no water. The AC was not running.
A federal official telling ABC News this is the deadliest case of human smuggling in U.S. history.
Today, we mourn for those 51 immigrants.
Tonight, police telling ABC the truck's driver and 2 others are in custody. Homeland Security now leading the investigation as authorities work to identify the victims. And among the dead, men and women from Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras. David, I just spoke with the lead investigator in the case who says that with this unprecedented wave of migration across the southwest border, smugglers are packing more and more people into those vehicles, and that journey north is becoming increasingly deadly. David.
Matt Gupman in San Antonio, just an awful scene, Matt. Thank you. Next tonight here, the death toll also rising after that collision between an Amtrak train and a dump truck in rural Missouri. A 3rd passenger now dying. The truck driver also killed after that train from Los Angeles to Chicago. After the collision, 16 members of a Boy Scout troop sprang into action, helping people evacuate the wreckage. That crossing did not have any lights or control devices. A local farmer posting this video just 2 weeks ago, saying he'd been warning about it for years. Tonight, the NTSB now revealing it would have cost $400,000 to add crossing arms, lights, and bells to transform it from a passive to an active crossing. There are going to be more questions to come on this for sure. In the meantime, the abortion battle now on the state level after the Supreme Court decision overturning Roe versus Wade. We have reported here on the 13 states with trigger laws looking to ban abortion immediately. Well, tonight, in some of those states, those trigger laws halted by the courts for now. ABC's Rachel Scott traveling the country again tonight.
Tonight, facing growing pressure, President Biden's health secretary insisted the administration is looking at every option to protect abortion rights.
There is no magic bullet, but if there is something we can do, we will find it and we will do it.
Secretary Javier Becerra outlining steps like increasing access to medication abortion, but offering few specifics. Our Mary Bruce pressing for details.
When can we expect more concrete steps to be announced? What's the holdup here?
It was a long decision, and it did upend 50 years of precedent. And so you want to make sure that what you do is within, as I said, the confines of the law. We're not interested in going rogue.
The battle over abortion rights now turns to the states. At least 13 have stopped nearly all abortions. About a dozen others set to take action in the coming weeks and months. My body, my choice. Abortion rights demonstrators marching from Illinois to Iowa.
We have to protect our siblings who can't. This does affect in other states.
Illinois now a safe haven, surrounded by states banning or severely restricting access to abortion, bracing for up to 30,000 more women to travel here over the year.
Patients who are struggling to make ends meet, who are deciding, do I pay my rent or do I feed my kids? And now they have this not only added expense and time of needing an abortion, but also the time they have to take off work and the childcare and the lodging. It's really heartbreaking.
The legal challenges continue tonight. Abortion bans in Louisiana and Utah have been put on hold for now, David.
Rachel Scott in Illinois for us. Rachel, thank you. Overseas tonight into the war in Ukraine, at least 20 people are dead, 40 more missing after that Russian missile strike on a shopping mall that's far from the front lines. President Zelensky tonight sharing this video the moment the missile hit the mall, a car factory behind it also destroyed, and new images of the debris falling on a nearby park, the impact knocking people down, some jumping into the water, families scrambling to get to safety when those missiles hit. When we come back here tonight, Ghislaine Maxwell sentenced for child sex trafficking connected to the Jeffrey Epstein case, what the judge decided today. And then news on the pandemic tonight involving boosters this fall, what FDA advisors voted in favor of late today. In a moment.
Take America's #1 news with you anywhere you go, anytime, free. Download the ABC News app now. Breaking news, exclusives, 24/7. There for you with one touch. The ABC News app. Download it now.
With so much at stake in our world right now, we wanted to thank you for your trust and for making ABC News America's #1 news.
And thank you for making ABC News Live America's #1 streaming news.
Tonight, Ghislaine Maxwell has now been sentenced to 20 years in prison after her conviction for grooming underage girls for Jeffrey Epstein. Without taking responsibility, she told the court today she empathized with the victims and called meeting Epstein the greatest regret of her life. Her lawyer says she will appeal. When we come back, news on a key booster this fall.
With so much at stake, so much on the line, more Americans turn here than any place else. ABC News World News Tonight with David Muir. America's #1 most watched newscast, now streaming on ABC News Live. Take America's #1 news with you anywhere you go, anytime, free. Download the ABC News app now. Breaking news, exclusives, 24/7. There for you with one touch. The ABC News app. Download it now.
Tonight, FDA advisors have voted in favor of updating the COVID boosters to target the Omicron variant in this country. The U.S. expected to face a new surge this fall. Those boosters are expected to be ready for this fall as well. When we come back, what happened right after they got their diplomas?
Take America's #1 news with you anywhere you go, anytime, free. Download the ABC News app now. Breaking news, exclusives, 24/7. There for you with one touch. The ABC News app. Download it now.
The most powerful stories of our time, anytime. Nightline.
Finally, the high school graduates, America Strong. These graduates in Port Jefferson, New York, are volunteer firefighters. Moments after their diplomas, the call, racing to the firehouse, the gowns on the floor, rushing to the fire, putting it out. No one was injured. Tonight, sending us this photo. It's now prom night. They say they're still ready for any call. Good night.
With so much at stake, so much on the line, more Americans turn here than any place else. ABC News World News Tonight with David Muir. America's #1 most watched newscast, now streaming on ABC News Live. Take America's #1 news with you anywhere you go, anytime, free. Download the ABC News app now. Breaking news, exclusives, 24/7. There for you with one touch. The ABC News app. Download it now.
This is an ABC News special report. Attack on the Capitol, the investigation. Now reporting David Muir.
Good afternoon. We're coming on the air for the beginning of today's 6th and unscheduled hearing by the January 6th committee. This session not originally on the calendar. It was called roughly 24 hours ago, the committee generating a sense of urgency with this announcement and a lot of speculation over today's hearing. The panel expected to present new evidence and crucial testimony today from a key witness. ABC News learning that former White House aide Cassidy Hutchinson will be testifying before the American people. She was a top aide to former President Trump's former chief of staff, Mark Meadows, an eyewitness inside the West Wing in the days and weeks leading up to the January 6th attack on the Capitol. Of course, as always, our political team standing by, our correspondents, Jonathan Karl, Mary Bruce, Terry Moran, Pierre Thomas, among the team waiting to weigh in on all this. Cassidy Hutchinson has met with the committee 3 separate times during lengthy closed-door depositions. Her testimony today is the result of months of negotiations. Now, she's expected to provide new insight into Mark Meadows' actions before, during, and after the January 6th assault on the Capitol. She'll also be asked to describe his interactions with the former president. While Trump was pushing false claims of a stolen election, sources telling ABC News during her deposition, Hutchinson confirmed claims about Meadows burning documents in his White House office. You can see her sitting down at the table there in the hearing room. The chairman, Benny Thompson, preparing to gavel in. Meadows, for his part, has not commented on the allegations and is currently in contempt of Congress for defying a subpoena. Let's listen into the room. Cassidy Hutchinson, you can see the still cameras. There are flashes. This is a moment in history. Gavelled in.
The Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol will be in order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare the committee in recess at any point. Pursuant to House Deposition Authority Regulation 10, the chair announces the committee's approval to release the deposition material presented during this hearing. Good afternoon. In our hearings over the previous weeks, the Select Committee has laid out the details of a multi-part pressure campaign driven by the former president aimed at overturning the results of the 2020 presidential election and blocking the transfer of power. We've shown that this effort was based on a lie that the election was stolen, tainted by widespread fraud, Donald Trump's big lie. In the weeks ahead, the committee will hold additional hearings about how Donald Trump summoned a mob of his supporters to Washington, spurred them to march on the Capitol, and failed to take meaningful action to quell the violence as it was unfolding on January 6th. However, in recent days, the Select Committee has obtained new information dealing with what was going on in the White House on January 6th and in the days prior. Specific detailed information about what the former president and his top aides were doing and saying in those critical hours. First-hand details of what transpired in the office of the White House Chief of Staff, just steps from the Oval Office as the threats of violence became clear, and indeed, violence ultimately descended on the Capitol in the attack on American democracy. It's important that the American people hear that information immediately. That's why, in consultation with the Vice Chair, I've recalled the committee for today's hearing. As you've seen and heard in our earlier hearings, the Select Committee has developed a massive body of evidence thanks to the many hundreds of witnesses who have voluntarily provided information relevant to our investigation. It hasn't always been easy to get that information because the same people who drove the former president's pressure campaign to overturn the election are now trying to cover up the truth about January 6th. But thanks to the courage of certain individuals, the truth won't be buried. The American people won't be left in the dark. Our witness today, Ms. Cassidy Hutchinson, has embodied that courage. I won't get into a lot of detail about Ms. Hutchinson's testimony will show. I'll allow her words to speak for themselves, and I hope everyone at home will listen very closely. First, I'll recognize our distinguished Vice Chair, Ms. Cheney of Wyoming, for any opening statements she'd care to offer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. In our first 5 hearings, the committee has heard from a significant number of Republicans, including former Trump administration Justice Department officials, Trump campaign officials, several members of President Trump's White House staff, a prominent conservative judge, and several others. Today's witness, Ms. Cassidy Hutchinson, is another Republican and another former member of President Trump's White House staff. Certain of us in the House of Representatives recall that Ms. Hutchinson once worked for House Republican Whip Steve Scalise, but she is also a familiar face on Capitol Hill because she held a prominent role in the White House Legislative Affairs Office and later was the principal aide to President Trump's Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows. Ms. Hutchinson has spent considerable time up here on Capitol Hill representing the Trump administration, and we welcome her back. Up until now, our hearings have each been organized to address specific elements of President Trump's plan to overturn the 2020 election. Today, we are departing somewhat from that model because Ms. Hutchinson's testimony touches on several important and cross-cutting topics that are relevant to each of our future hearings. In her role working for the White House Chief of Staff, Ms. Hutchinson handled a vast number of sensitive issues. She worked in the West Wing, several steps down the hall from the Oval Office. Ms. Hutchinson spoke daily with members of Congress, with high-ranking officials in the administration, with senior White House staff, including Mr. Meadows, with White House counsel, lawyers, and with Mr. Tony Ornato, who served as the White House Deputy Chief of Staff. She also worked on a daily basis with members of the Secret Service who were posted in the White House. In short, Ms. Hutchinson was in a position to know a great deal about the happenings in the Trump White House. Ms. Hutchinson has already sat for 4 videotaped interviews with committee investigators, and we thank her very much for her cooperation and for her courage. We will cover certain, but not all relevant topics within Ms. Hutchinson's knowledge today. Again, our future hearings will supply greater detail, putting the testimony today in a broader and more complete context. Today, you will hear Ms. Hutchinson relate certain firsthand observations of President Trump's conduct on January 6th. You will also hear new information regarding the actions and statements of Mr. Trump's senior advisors that day, including his Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows, and his White House counsel. And we will begin to examine evidence bearing on what President Trump and members of the White House staff knew about the prospect for violence on January 6th, even before that violence began. To best communicate the information the committee has gathered, we will follow the practice of our recent hearings, playing videotape testimony from Ms. Hutchinson and others, and also posing questions to Ms. Hutchinson live. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much. Our witness today is Ms. Cassidy Hutchinson, who served in the Trump administration in the White House Office of Legislative Affairs from 2019 to 2020, and as a special assistant to the President in the White House Chief of Staff's office from March 2020 through January 2021. I will now swear in our witness. The witness will please stand and raise her right hand. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God. Thank you. You may be seated. Let the record reflect the witness answered in the affirmative. I now recognize myself for questions. Ms. Hutchinson, I'd like to start with a few questions about your background. These are some photographs we've obtained highlighting your career. These show you with members of Congress, including Steve Scalise, as well as the White House with leader Kevin McCarthy and Jim Jordan. Others show you with the President and members of Congress aboard Air Force One. Before you worked in the White House, you worked on Capitol Hill for Representative Steve Scalise, the Republican whip, and Senator Ted Cruz. And then in 2019, you moved to the White House and served there until the end of the Trump administration in 2020. When you started at the White House, you served in the Office of Legislative Affairs. We understand that you were initially hired as a staff assistant, but were soon promoted to a position of greater responsibility. Can you explain your role for the committee?
When I moved over to the White House Chief of Staff's office with Mr. Meadows when he became the 4th Chief of Staff, it's difficult to describe a typical day. I was a special assistant to the President and an advisor to the Chief of Staff. The days depended on what the President was doing that day, and that's kind of how my portfolio was reflected. I had a lot of outreach with members of Congress, senior cabinet officials. I would work on policy issues with relevant internal components and members on the Hill, as well as security protocol at the White House complex for Mr. Meadows and the President.
And then you received another promotion in March 2020. At that time, you became the principal aide to the new White House Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows. Is that right?
That's correct, sir.
What did a typical day look like for you in your work with Mr. Meadows?
It varied with what was going on. We spent a lot of time on the Hill. I spent time on the Hill independently too, as I was his liaison for Capitol Hill. We did a lot of presidential travel engagements, but mostly I was there to serve what the Chief of Staff needed, and a lot of times what the Chief of Staff needed was a reflection of what the President's schedule is detailed to do that day.
So is it fair to say that you spoke regularly in your position, both with members of Congress and with senior members of the Trump administration?
That's correct. That's a fair assessment, sir.
And would you say that in your work with Mr. Meadows, you were typically in contact with him and others in the White House throughout the day?
That's correct, sir. Mr. Meadows and I were in contact almost pretty much throughout every day, consistently.
Although so much of grave importance happens in the West Wing of the White House, it's quite a small building. Above me on the screen, you can see a map of the first floor of the West Wing of the White House. On the right, you can see the President's Oval Office. On the left, the Chief of Staff's office suite. Within the Chief of Staff's office suite is the heart of the West Wing, was your desk, which was between the Vice President's office, Ms. Kirshner's office, and the Oval Office. Ms. Hutchinson, is this an accurate depiction of where you were located?
It's accurate. It's a lot smaller than it looks.
Absolutely. Ms. Hutchinson, this is a photo that shows the short distance between your office and the President's Oval Office. And it only takes 5 to 10 seconds or so to walk down the hall from your office to the Oval Office. Is that right?
That's correct.
Thank you. Pursuant to the Section 5C8 of House Resolution 503, the chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Wyoming, Ms. Cheney, for questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, we will begin today with an exchange that first provided Ms. Hutchinson a tangible sense of the ongoing planning for the events of January 6th. On January 2nd, 4 days before the attack on our Capitol, President Trump's lead lawyer, Mr. Giuliani, was meeting with White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows and others. Ms. Hutchinson, do you remember Mr. Giuliani meeting with Mr. Meadows on January 2nd, 2021?
I do. He met with Mr. Meadows in the evening of January 2nd, 2021.
And we understand that you walked Mr. Giuliani out of the White House that night, and he talked to you about January 6th. What do you remember him saying?
As Mr. Giuliani and I were walking to his vehicles that evening, he looked at me and said something to the effect of, "Cass, are you excited for the 6th? It's going to be a great day." I remember looking at him and saying, "Rudy, could you explain what's happening on the 6th? He had responded something to the effect of, "We're going to the Capitol. It's going to be great. The president's going to be there. He's going to look powerful. He's going to be with the members. He's going to be with the senators. Talk to the chief about it. Talk to the chief about it. He knows about it."
And did you go back then up to the West Wing and tell Mr. Meadows about your conversation with Mr. Giuliani?
I did. After Mr. Giuliani had left the campus that evening, I went back up to our office and I found Mr. Meadows in his office on the couch. He was scrolling through his phone. I remember leaning against the doorway and saying, "I had an interesting conversation with Rudy, Mark. It sounds like we're going to go to the Capitol." He didn't look up from his phone and said something to the effect of, "There's a lot going on, Cass, but I don't know. Things might get real bad on January 6th.
Ms. Hutchinson, Mr. Meadows is engaged in litigation with the committee to try to avoid testifying here. What was your reaction when he said to you things might get real bad?
In the days before January 2nd, I was apprehensive about the 6th. I had heard general plans for a rally. I had heard tentative movements to potentially go to the Capitol. But when hearing Rudy's take on January 6th and then Mark's response, that evening was the first moment that I remember feeling scared and nervous for what could happen on January 6th. And I had a deeper concern for what was happening with the planning aspects of it.
Thank you, Ms. Hutchinson. Today, we're going to be focusing primarily on the events of January 5th and 6th at the White House. But to begin and to frame the discussion, I want to talk about a conversation that you had with Mr. John Ratcliffe, the Director of National Intelligence. And you had this conversation in December of 2020. Mr. Ratcliffe was nominated by President Trump to oversee U.S. intelligence, our U.S. intelligence community. And before his appointment, Mr. Ratcliffe was a Republican member of Congress. As you will see on this clip, Director Ratcliffe's comments in December of 2020 were prescient.
My understanding was Director Ratcliffe didn't want much to do with the post-election period. Director Ratcliffe felt that it wasn't something that the White House should be pursuing. It felt it was dangerous for the president's legacy. He had expressed to me that he was concerned that it could spiral out of control and potentially be dangerous. either for our democracy or the way that things were going for the 6th.
When you say it wasn't something the White House should be pursuing, what's the it?
Trying to fight the results of the election, finding missing ballots, pressuring filing lawsuits in certain states where there didn't seem to be significant evidence, and reaching out to state legislatures about that. So pretty much the way that the White House is handling the post-election period, he felt that there could be dangerous repercussions in terms of precedent set for elections, for our democracy, for the 6th. He was hoping that we would concede.
So, Ms. Hutchinson, now we're going to turn to certain information that was available before January 4th and what the Trump administration and the president knew about the potential for violence before January 6th. On the screen, you will see an email received by Acting Deputy Attorney General Donahue on January 4th from the National Security Division of the Department of Justice. Mr. Donahue testified in our hearings last week. The email identifies apparent planning by those coming to Washington on January 6th to, quote, occupy federal buildings and discussions of, quote, invading the Capitol building. Here's what Mr. Donahue said to us.
And we knew that if you have tens of thousands of very upset people showing up in Washington, D.C., that there was potential for violence.
The U.S. Secret Service was looking at similar information and watching the planned demonstrations. In fact, their intelligence division sent several emails to White House personnel like Deputy Chief of Staff Tony Ornato and the head of the President's Protective Detail, Robert Engel, including certain materials listing events like those on the screen. The White House continued to receive updates about planned demonstrations, including information regarding the Proud Boys organizing and planning to attend events on January 6th. Although Ms. Hutchinson has no detailed knowledge of any planning involving the Proud Boys for January 6th, she did note this.
I recall hearing the word Oath Keeper and hearing the word Proud Boys closer to the planning of the January 6th rally when Mr. Giuliani would be around.
On January 3rd, the Capitol Police issued a special event assessment. In that document, the Capitol Police noted that the Proud Boys and other groups planned to be in Washington, D.C. on January 6th and indicated that, quote, unlike previous post-election protests, the targets of the pro-Trump supporters are not necessarily the counter-protesters as they were previously, but rather Congress itself is the target on the 6th. Of course, we all know now that the Proud Boys showed up on January 6th, marched from the Washington Monument to the Capitol that day, and led the riotous mob to invade and occupy our Capitol. Ms. Hutchinson, I want to play you a clip of one of our meetings when you described a call on January 4th that you received from National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien on the same topic, potential violence on January 6th.
I received a call from Robert O'Brien, the National Security Advisor. He had asked if he could speak with Mr. Meadows about potential words of violence that he was hearing that were potentially going to happen on the Hill on January 6th. I had asked if he had connected with Tony Ornato because Tony Ornato had a conversation with him, with Mark, about that topic. Robert had said, I'll talk to Tony, and then I don't know if Robert ever connected with Mark about the issue.
Ms. Hutchinson, can you describe for us Mr. Ornato's responsibilities as Deputy Chief of Staff?
The Deputy Chief of Staff position at the White House for operations is arguably one of the most important positions that somebody can hold. They're in charge of all security protocol for the campus and all presidential protectees, primarily the president and the First Family, but anything that requires security for any individual that has presidential protection, so the chief of staff or the national security advisor, as well as the vice president's team too. Tony would oversee all of that, and he was the conduit for security protocol between White House staff and the United States Secret Service.
Thank you. And you also described a brief meeting between Mr. Ornato and Mr. Meadows on the potential for violence. The meeting was on January 4th. They were talking about the potential for violence on January 6th. Let's listen to a clip of that testimony.
Remember, Mr. Ornato had talked to him about intelligence reports. I remember Mr. Ornato coming in and saying that we had intel reports saying that there could potentially be violence on the 6th.
You also told us about reports of violence and weapons that the Secret Service were receiving on the night of January 5th and throughout the day on January 6th. Is that correct?
That's correct.
There are reports that police in Washington, D.C. had arrested several people with firearms or ammunition following a separate pro-Trump rally in Freedom Plaza on the evening of January 5th. Are those some of the reports that you recall hearing about?
They are.
Of course, the world now knows that the people who attacked the Capitol on January 6th had many different types of weapons. When a president speaks, the Secret Service typically requires those attending to pass through metal detectors, known as magnetometers, or MAGs for short. The Select Committee has learned that people who willingly entered the enclosed area for President Trump's speech were screened so they could attend the rally at the Ellipse. They had weapons and other items that were confiscated: pepper spray, knives, brass knuckles, tasers, body armor, gas masks, batons, blunt weapons. And those were just from the people who chose to go through the security for the president's event on the Ellipse, not the several thousand members of the crowd who refused to go through the MAGs and watched from the lawn near the Washington Monument. The Select Committee has learned about reports from outside the magnetometers and has obtained police radio transmissions identifying individuals with firearms, including AR-15s, near the Ellipse on the morning of January 6th. Let's listen.
There's an individual in a tree, it's going to be a white male, about 6 feet tall, thin build, brown cowboy boots. He's got blue jeans and a blue jean jacket, and underneath the blue jean jacket, complainants both saw a stock with AR-15. He's going to be with a group of individuals, about five to eight other individuals. Two of the individuals in that group at the base of the tree, near the porta potties, were wearing green fatigues, green olive drab style fatigues, about 5'8", 5'9", skinny white males, brown cowboy boots. They had Glock-style pistols in their waistband. 8736 with the message that subject weapon on his right hip. After that, he's in the tree.
Motor 1, make sure PPD knows they have an elevated threat in the tree south side of Constitution Avenue. Look for the Don't Tread on Me flag, American flag face mask, cowboy boots, weapon on the right side hip.
I've got 3 men walking down the street. Fatigued was carrying AR-15. Copy at 14th and Independence.
AR-15s at 14th and Independence. As you saw in those emails, the first report that we showed, we now know was sent in the 8 o'clock hour on January 6th. This talked about people in the crowd wearing ballistic helmets and body armor, carrying radio equipment, and military-grade backpacks. The second report we showed you on the screen was sent by the Secret Service in the 11 a.m. hour, and it addressed reports of a man with a rifle near the Ellipse. Ms. Hutchinson, in prior testimony, you described for us a meeting in the White House around 10 a.m. in the morning of January 6th, involving Chief of Staff Meadows and Tony Ornato. Were you in that meeting?
I was.
Let's listen to your testimony about that meeting, and then we'll have some questions.
I think the last time we talked, you mentioned that some of the weapons that people had at the rally included flagpoles, oversized sticks or flagpoles, bear spray. Is there anything else that you recall hearing about that the people who would gather on the Ellipse had?
I recall Tony and I having a conversation with Mark probably around 10 a.m., 10:15 a.m., where I remember Tony mentioning knives, guns in the form of pistols and rifles, bear spray, body armor, spears, and flagpoles. Spears were one item, flagpoles were one item, and then Tony had relayed to me something to the effect of, and these effing people are fastening spears onto the ends of flagpoles.
Ms. Hutchinson, here's a clip of your testimony regarding Mr. Meadows' response to learning that the rally attendees were armed that day.
What was Mark's reaction, Mr. Meadows' reaction to this list of weapons that people had in the crowd?
When Tony and I went in to talk to Mark that morning, Mark was sitting on his couch and on his phone, which was something typical. And I remember Tony just got right into it. I was like, sorry, I just want to let you know, and had informed him, like, this is how many people we have outside the mags right now. These are the weapons that we're known to have. It's possible he listed more weapons off that I just don't recall. And gave him a brief and concise explanation, but also fairly thorough. And I remember distinctly Mark not looking up from his phone. And I remember Tony finishing his explanation and it taking a few seconds for Mark to say something to the point where I almost said, Mark, did you hear him? And then Mark chimed in and was like, all right, anything else? Still looking down at his phone. And Tony looked at me and I looked at Tony and Tony said, no, sir, do you have any questions? He's like, what are you hearing? And I looked at Tony and I was like, sir, he just told you about what was happening down at the rally. And he was like, yeah, I know. And then he looked up and said, have you talked to the president? And Tony said, yes, sir, he's aware too. He said, all right, good.
He asked Tony if Tony had informed the president.
Yes.
And Tony said, yes, he had.
So, Ms. Hutchinson, is it your understanding that Mr. Ornato told the president about weapons at the rally on the morning of January 6th?
That's what Mr. Ornato relayed to me.
And here's how you characterize Mr. Meadows' general response when people raised concerns about what could happen on January 6th.
So at the time, in the days leading up to the 6th, there were lots of public reports about how things might go bad on the 6th, and even the potential for violence. If I'm hearing you correctly, what stands out to you is that Mr. Meadows did not share those concerns, or at least did not act on those concerns?
Did not act on those concerns would be accurate.
But other people raised them to him, like in this exchange, you mentioned that Mr. Ornato pulled him aside.
That's correct.
Ms. Hutchinson, we're going to show now an exchange of texts between you and Deputy Chief of Staff Ornato. And these text messages were exchanged while you were at the Ellipse. In one text, you write, but the crowd looks good from this vantage point as long as we get the shot. He was effing furious. And the text messages also stress that President Trump kept mentioning the OTR, an off-the-record movement. We're going to come back and ask you about that in a minute. But could you tell us, first of all, who it is in the text who was furious?
The he in that text that I was referring to was the president.
And why was he furious, Ms. Hutchinson?
He was furious because he wanted the arena that we had on the Ellipse to be maxed out at capacity for all attendees. The advance team had relayed to him that the mags were free-flowing. Everybody who wanted to come in had already come in, but he still was angry about the extra space and wanted more people to come in.
And did you go to the rally in the presidential motorcade?
I was there, yes, in the motorcade.
And were you backstage with the president and other members of his staff and family?
I was.
And you told us, Ms. Hutchinson, about particular comments that you heard while you were in the tent area.
When we were in the offstage announce area tent behind the stage, he was very concerned about the shot, meaning the photograph that we would get, because the rally space wasn't full. One of the reasons, which I've previously stated, was because he wanted it to be full and for people to not feel excluded because they'd come far to watch him at the rally. And he felt the MAGs were at fault for not letting everybody in. But another leading reason, and likely the primary reason, is because he wanted it full and he was angry that we weren't letting people through the MAGs with weapons, what the Secret Service deems as weapons and our weapons. But when we were in the offstage announced tent, I was part of a conversation. I was in the vicinity of a conversation where I overheard the president say something to the effect of, I don't effing care that they have weapons. They're not here to hurt me. Take the effing MAGs away. Let my people in. They can march to the Capitol from here. Let the people in. Take the effing MAGs away.
Just to be clear, Ms. Hutchinson, is it your understanding that the president wanted to take the MAGs away and said that the armed individuals were not there to hurt him?
That's a fair assessment.
The issue wasn't with the amount of space available in the official rally area only, but instead that people did not want to have to go through the MAGs. Let's listen to a portion of what you told us about that.
In this particular instance, it wasn't the capacity of our space, it was the MAGs and the people that didn't want to come through. And that's what Tony had been trying to relay to him that morning. It's not the issues that we encountered on the campaign. We have enough space, or they don't want to come in right now. They have weapons that they don't want confiscated by the Secret Service, and they're fine on the mall. They can see you on the mall, and they want to march straight to the Capitol from the mall.
The president apparently wanted all attendees inside the official rally space and repeatedly said, quote, "They're not here to hurt me."
And just to be clear, so he was told again in that conversation, or was he told again in that conversation, that people couldn't come through the MAGs because they had weapons?
Correct.
And that people, and his response was to say they can march to the Capitol from the ellipse.
Something to the effect of, take the effing MAGs away. They're not here to hurt me. Let them in. Let my people in. They can march to the Capitol after the rally's over. They can march from the ellipse. Take the effing MAGs away. Then they can march to the Capitol.
Ms. Hutchinson, what we saw when those clips were playing were photos provided by the National Archives showing the president in the offstage tent before his speech on the ellipse. You were in some of those photos as well. And I just want to confirm that is when you heard the president say the people with weapons weren't there to hurt him and that he wanted the Secret Service to remove the magnetometers.
That's correct. In the photos that you displayed, we were standing towards the front of the tent with the TVs, really close to where he would walk out to go onto the stage. These conversations happened 2 to 3 minutes before he took the stage that morning.
Let's reflect on that for a moment. President Trump was aware that a number of the individuals in the crowd had weapons and were wearing body armor. And here's what President Trump instructed the crowd to do.
We're going to walk down, and I'll be there with you. We're going to walk down. We're going to walk down anyone you want, but I think right here we're going to walk down to the Capitol.
And the crowd, as we know, did proceed to the Capitol. It soon became apparent to the Secret Service, including the Secret Service teams in the crowd, along with White House staff, that security at the Capitol would not be sufficient.
I had 2 or 3 phone conversations with Mr. Ornato when we were at the ellipse, and then I had 4 men on Mr. Meadows' detail with me in between those individuals and then a few other bodies on the ground, just the Secret Service doing advance. They were getting notifications through their radios, and Mr. Ornato in one phone conversation had called me and said, make sure the chief knows that they're getting close to the Capitol. It's they're having trouble stacking bodies.
And Ms. Hutchinson, when you said they were having trouble stacking bodies, did you mean that law enforcement at the Capitol needed more people to defend the Capitol from the rioters?
It was becoming clear to us and to the Secret Service that Capitol police officers were getting overrun at the security barricades outside of the Capitol building. and they were short people to defend the building against the rioters.
And you mentioned that Mr. Ornato was conveying this to you because he wanted you to tell Mr. Meadows. So did you tell Mr. Meadows that people were getting closer to the Capitol and that Capitol Police was having difficulty?
After I had the conversation with Mr. Meadows, after I had the conversation with Mr. Ornato, I went to have the discussion with Mr. Meadows. He was in a secure vehicle at the time making a call. So when I had gone over to the car, I went to open the door to let him know, and he had immediately shut it. I don't know who he was speaking with. It wasn't something that he regularly did, especially when I would go over to give him information. So I was a bit taken aback, but I didn't think much of it, and thinking that I would be able to have the conversation with him a few moments later.
And were you able to have that conversation a few moments later?
Probably about 20 to 25 minutes later. There was another period in between where he shut the door again. And then when he finally got out of the vehicle, we had the conversation. But at that point, there was a backlog of information that he should have been made aware of.
And so you opened the door to the control car and Mr. Meadows pulled it shut?
That's correct.
And he did that 2 times?
That's correct.
And when you finally were able to give Mr. Meadows the information about the violence at the Capitol, what was his reaction?
He almost had a lack of reaction. I remember him saying, all right, something to the effect of, how much longer does the president have left in his speech?
Again, much of this information about the potential for violence was known or learned before the onset of the violence, early enough for President Trump to take steps to prevent it. He could, for example, have urged the crowd at the Ellipse not to march to the Capitol. He could have condemned the violence immediately once it began, or he could have taken multiple other steps. But as we will see today and in later hearings, President Trump had something else in mind. One other question at this point, Ms. Hutchinson, were you aware of concerns that White House counsel Pat Cipollone or Eric Hirschman had about the language President Trump used in his Ellipse speech?
There were many discussions the morning of the 6th about the rhetoric of the speech that day. In my conversations with Mr. Hirschman, he had relayed that we would be foolish to include language that had been included at the president's request, which had lines along to the effect of, fight for Trump, we're going to march to the Capitol, I'll be there with you, fight for me, fight for what we're doing, fight for the movement. Things about the vice president at the time, too. Both Mr. Hirschman and White House counsel's office were urging the speechwriters to not include that language for legal concerns and also for the optics of what it could portray the president wanting to do that day.
And we just heard the president say that he would be with his supporters as they marched to the Capitol. Even though he did not end up going, he certainly wanted to. Some have questioned whether President Trump genuinely planned to come here to the Capitol on January 6th. In his book, Mark Meadows falsely wrote that after President Trump gave his speech on January 6th, he told Mr. Meadows that he was, quote, speaking metaphorically about the walk to the Capitol. As you will see, Donald Trump was not speaking metaphorically. As we heard earlier, Rudy Giuliani told Ms. Hutchinson that Mr. Trump planned to travel to the Capitol on January 6th. I want to pause for just a moment to ask you, Ms. Hutchinson, to explain some of the terminology you will hear today. We've heard you use 2 different terms to describe plans for the president's movement to the Capitol or anywhere else. One of those is a scheduled movement, and another one is OTR. Could you describe for us what each of those mean?
A scheduled presidential movement is on his official schedule. It's notified to the press and to a wide range of staff that will be traveling with him. It's known to the public, known to the Secret Service, and they're able to coordinate the movement days in advance. An off-the-record movement is confined to the knowledge of a very, very small group of advisors and staff. Typically, a very small group of staff would travel with him mostly that are just included in the national security package. You can pull an off-the-record movement together in less than an hour. It's a way to kind of circumvent having to release it to the press, if that's the goal of it, or to not have to have as many security parameters put in place ahead of time to make the movement happen.
Thank you. And let's turn back now to the president's plans to travel to the Capitol on January 6th. We know that White House counsel Pat Cipollone was concerned about the legal implications of such a trip, and he agreed with the Secret Service that it shouldn't happen. Ms. Hutchinson, did you have any conversations with Pat Cipollone about his concerns about the president going to the Capitol on January 6th?
On January 3rd, Mr. Cipollone had approached me, knowing that Mark had raised the prospect of going up to the Capitol on January 6th. Mr. Cipollone and I had a brief private conversation where he said to me, we need to make sure that this doesn't happen. This would be legally a terrible idea for us. We have serious legal concerns if we go up to the Capitol that day. And he then urged me to continue relaying that to Mr. Meadows, because it's my understanding that Mr. Cipollone thought that Mr. Meadows was indeed pushing this along with the president.
And we understand, Ms. Hutchinson, that you also spoke to Mr. Cipollone on the morning of the 6th as you were about to go to the rally on the Ellipse. And Mr. Cipollone said something to you like, make sure the movement to the Capitol does not happen. Is that correct?
That's correct. I saw Mr. Cipollone right before I walked out onto West Exec that morning, and Mr. Cipollone said something to the effect of, please make sure we don't go up to the Capitol, Cassidy. Keep in touch with me. We're going to get charged with every crime imaginable if we make that movement happen.
And do you remember which crimes Mr. Cipollone was concerned with?
In the days leading up to the 6th, we had conversations about potentially obstructing justice or defrauding the electoral count.
Let's hear about some of those concerns that you mentioned earlier in one of your interviews with us.
Having a private conversation with Pat late in the afternoon of the 3rd or the 4th, that Pat was concerned it would look like we were obstructing justice or obstructing the electoral college count. And I apologize for probably not being very firm with my legal terms here, but that it would look like we were obstructing what was happening on Capitol Hill. And he was also worried that it would look like we were inciting a riot or encouraging a riot to erupt on the Capitol, at the Capitol.
In fact, in the days before January 6th and on January 6th itself, President Trump expressed to multiple White House aides that he wanted to go to the Capitol after his speech. Here's what various White House aides have told the committee about the president's desire to go to the Capitol.
Did the president tell you this, that he wanted to speak at the Capitol?
Correct, yes.
During the meeting in the dining room, did the idea of the president proceeding or walking to the Capitol on the 6th after his speech come up?
Walking to the Capitol? No.
Driving to the Capitol?
It came up.
Okay, how did it come up and what was discussed?
He brought it up. He said, I want to go down to the Capitol.
What about